You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.
Last man on Earth lives in a fortress.
What day is it anyway? Monday? The hell it is. It's Sunday. Sunday I always dress for dinner. Discovery check. How does that grab you, Caesar?
The last man on Earth always carries an automatic weapon. The last man on Earth is hunting. Because the last man on Earth is not alone.
Obama himself.
And I see you got a mad scientist.
You know me?
And about your work.
My work?
Incremental effects, countermeasures to toxic agents in liquid systems, delivery, microbiological, latest January 1975, remember?
You know what it means?
I was a med school senior when they scratched the world.
Family.
God, I forgot to keep the fuel up in the generator. They'll be into the garage.
Not the place where all the dead were burned. Get the switches! Get those lights on! He's gone! Find him! Find him!
Damn it! And step on it!
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Mr. Bursztynski.
There has never been a projection booth. There never was a projection booth.
Also back in the booth is Mr. Andrew Nette.
Hi, big brother. How's your ass?
This week we're discussing the 1971 film from director Boris Sagal, The Omega Man. The film stars Charlton Heston as Robert Neville, possibly the last man on Earth after a plague which has killed the majority of the population, leaves pockets of albino mutants who can't stand the sun. They're known as the Family and are led by the one and only Anthony Zerbe as Matthias. They vowed to kill Neville if it's the last thing they do. We will be getting into spoilers about this film as well as The Last Man on Earth, I Am Legend, and the book on which all of the above are based by Richard Matheson. So, Maurice, I have to ask, when was the first time you saw The Omega Man, and what did you think?
I think I was about 10 years old or so. It was showing on TV in a modified version, although, interestingly enough, I think I realized years later that the only thing that they censored out of it was Rosalind Cash in the nude. None of the violence, so there you go for standards. But, yeah, I was about 10 years old, used to show, I think, every year on TV for quite a while, and it scared the shit out of me. I remember feeling really, really dissettled by it. I don't know, I was trying to work out for years what it was, and certainly I think the music had a large part of it. We'll certainly get into that, but man, those cloaks that the family wore, that was some scary shit, and the albino eyes. Yeah, look, it really, for years, I've loved this film. Watching it again for the booth, I might have a few different thoughts, but yeah, overall, it's been a film I've loved for years.
How about you, Andrew?
Much like Maurice, it would have been late night television. I can't remember exactly when, but it was a long time ago. I've been a big fan of the film ever since. In fact, it's kind of my I'm coming home drunk, need to chill out on the sofa for a little while. What film do I put on? It's always The Omega Man before I go to bed. So I've seen it a number of times.
Which speaks to your heavy drinking.
Yeah, that's quite true. That's quite true. In fact, I've seen the first 20 minutes of it countless times. It really made a huge impression on me. I think Maurice is really onto something when he talks about the music. The score is such a crucial part of the overall feel and mood of this film. Genuinely creepy film. It's almost an obligatory phrase on the projection booth about 1970s films, but it's, you know, as it's an early 1970s film, of course, no one gets out alive. It's a really dark film. It's a really downbeat film. It has some great action scenes in it. And, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into this. Even though he's probably got a bad rep these days, I am a big fan of a lot of Charlton Heston's acting roles, and I think he's great in this film.
Were either of you guys familiar with the book I Am Legend? It doesn't sound like, Maurice, you would have read this at 10 years old, but have you gone back since and read it?
I read the book maybe about 20 years ago. In preparation for the show, I went and listened to the audio book and found I actually enjoyed it a lot more than when I first read the book. At the time, I just remember sort of thinking, oh, hang on, this is nothing like the Omega Man. I mean, I guess I enjoyed it at the time, but there was an aspect to it which I've enjoyed a lot more this time, and that was like the 2-chapter long, I think, or 3-chapter long focus on the science that he used, or the experimentation that he used to sort of work out what made the vampires tick. And as you say, yeah, I didn't actually get into it at 10 years old, but I have read it a long time ago.
How about you, Andrew?
I would have read it about 10 years ago, I think. Terrific book. Very sort of somber book. Was interested, yes, in how much of the book is really just a meditation, I suppose, on human existence, on science, on the nature of, I suppose, being, and yes, long passages where Neville, the main character, is basically trying to figure out these creatures that are sort of gathering outside his house every night, these sort of weird shuffling zombie type creatures. They're not nearly as cool as they are as in the Omega Man. Are they actually some sort of supernatural being? Do they have a supernatural creation, or are they the product of some sort of scientific experiment or some sort of science gone wrong? So, but I enjoy the book. I think it's great, and I think, you know, it's one of a number of good books that Richard Matheson, the author, wrote. Of course, he also was I think he was quite prolific in terms of film, and he wrote television, and, you know, it's done some terrific stuff. And of course, who doesn't like some of the work he's done for film, including, I think it was Trilogy of Terror is one of his, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. And he helped write one of my favorite things in the whole world, The Night Stalker, which was the first Kolchak movie. Yeah, he dabbled in vampires throughout his career, because he also did the I think it was Dan Curtis again doing the Dracula 1978, I think it was, with Jack Palance.
Right. Well, okay, despite that, I think he's been really, really good, yeah.
He wrote quite a few things that ended up being turned into movies. There was a little while there where Hollywood was just going nuts with his stuff, with What Dreams May Come and Stir of Echoes seemed to come out within just a matter of, I don't know, just a few years from each other. I could be just compressing time in my own head, though. But yeah, he was great. And then he actually tried to get I Am Legend made and adapted the script himself for Hammer Films, and it never actually happened. And I went back, and there's a book version of this, which has an intro by Mark Protosevich, who also wrote a fantastic book about Kolchak, the Night Stalker companion. and they really slag on The Last Man on Earth, which was the first adaptation of I Am Legend, which ended up kind of using some of the script that Matheson wrote. And then he really talks shit about Omega Man. And then for whatever reason, I don't know if it was just because maybe when it was coming out, they were praising I Am Legend, the Will Smith film. And it's just like, okay, that's a weird thing to do. I don't know why you would necessarily do that.
Actually, it's really interesting looking at, so he also did The Night Strangler in 1973. That was another Kolchak film. He did the script for Jewel, that 1971 film, about the sort of possessed truck, or not, he did the screenplay for The Devil Rides Out. He really did a huge amount of stuff.
Yeah, and he was very prolific, especially with his film work when it comes to things like working with Roger Corman and doing things like Comedy of Terrors and The Raven. So, yeah, it was right around that time that he was adapting his own work. He was adapting I Am Legend for the screen, and I'm trying to remember what they were calling it. It was The Night Creatures was what he was calling it. So not to be confused with The Night Strangler or The Night Stalker.
And of course, sorry, I just have to say too, of course, that trilogy of terror, 1975, with Karen Black and that little voodoo doll.
Yeah, the Zuni fetish doll. One of the best things.
25 minutes of television that I have to say, along with the Omega Man, haunted me for a large number of years in my youth.
Yeah, watching that on a weekday afternoon, the 4:00 movie on Channel 7, man, oh man, that trilogy of terror just freaked me the fuck out. And I can barely remember the other two stories that went with it, but when it comes to that Zuni fetish doll and that end shot of Karen Black with the knife.
One of the great things about having a child is, of course, you can then subject them to all the TV you had as a youth. And my daughter and I've shown my daughter Trilogy of Terror, and yes, we watched the whole thing. The other two I can hardly even remember, even though it was only a couple of years ago. But she and I both really geek out on that Karen Black Zumi fetish doll scene. In fact, there was one time when I did come home one day and she was sitting in the hallway with a knife stabbing the floor as a sort of homage to it. She thought that would I'd get a kick out of that, which is I sort of did in a creepy way, yes.
I'm not sure I'm coming around to your place, Andrew.
The thing about the I Am Legend book that I find interesting is how it's a story of vampires, but it's our main character finding out why vampires are considered real and all of these scientific explanations for everything. Like, we've talked on the show, I don't know how many times, about vampires and all of the trappings of vampires and all the little things. I mean, just recently we talked about Daughters of Darkness, and there's this whole thing that I forget about, which is, oh yeah, vampires don't like running water, or if you throw a knotted rope to them, they're very OCD and they have to unknot the rope and stuff. It's like, okay, those are two vampire things that I'm not too familiar with. But then you get things like the mirrors, not casting reflections, the idea of garlic being dangerous to them, stakes, of course, through the heart, all those things. And Matheson goes through in I Am Legend and talks about each one of those things and how they might have a scientific explanation to them. This whole thing of like, oh yeah, the vampires, their skin reforms very quickly. That's why you can shoot them all day long. But if you open them up with this wooden stake, then the seal is broken, the air gets in, and they die that way. Or they actually can see their reflections in mirrors, but they don't like looking at themselves, so they break the mirrors, and they hate mirrors and all these things. So it's interesting how he uses that as like, oh, I'm going to explain away vampires in this way. And this, like you were saying, he's very, very scientific, Robert Neville, because he is one of the guys that's behind this whole vampire plague. So we have the mixing of science and also the whole science behind why is he immune. He's one of the few people that's immune to this whole thing. So it's a nice way of giving us this stuff while also giving us a very tense vampire story.
That was something I think many years ago, as I said at the start of the show, that maybe took me out of the book at the time, because I sort of thought, well, we got this narrative and we're spending, a couple of whole chapters breaking the story. Where's the story? Let's get on with it. What happens? Where's he going to kick the vampire's ass? But this time around, maybe with a few more years of maturity on me, I hope that's the case anyway. I found it riveting, really listening and sort of getting to respect Neville through the book in a different way to what we might see in the films. I mean, admittedly, I know that from what you've said, Mike, that the original film was slagged off a lot, but there was no way that I believe that they could have filmed all that level of experimentation. It's really a very descriptive thing. But as we'll probably get into when we talk about the Vincent Price film further, it really is the closest thing out of the three films that we have to the original book. But it's just taking that scientific part of it, a couple of chapters. I can't imagine how they would have filmed that.
What did you think of The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price?
First watch for me for a long while, I thought it was actually really strong. I really enjoyed it. I mean, it's the most, as Maurice said, it's the most connected to the source novel. It is a lot of parts of the film are, yes, just him talking about are they zombies, are they vampires, are they scientific, are they supernatural? But it does have some genuinely creepy aspects to it. I mean, I think the whole Vincent Price is just living in this suburban house in what looks like this sort of normal suburban street and just cruising around by day, basically, you know, staking, well, are they vampires? What are they? These creatures through the heart, and then at night, basically, you know, being in his house. I think there's that whole aspect of the smoking pit where he puts all the bodies that he finds outside his house every morning, which is really sort of, you know, because I think also in the film there is this intonation that it might have been, you know, the sort of vampire/zombie contagion might have been the result of some, you know, might have been the result of some sort of airborne virus from some sort of war, which is very much like, you know, you see that in other films around that period, like, you know, Stanley Kramer's On the Beach. It's that low key suburban sort of hell, which I think is really very effective. And I suppose given that, and of course when I first saw the film, I don't know how long ago, I had no idea that it had been filmed in Italy. But I mean, looking at it now, it's not only that sort of evocation of this sort of weird, deserted suburban America. It's made middle America. It's made even more bizarre by the fact of being a sort of weird, deserted suburban America in Italy, which gives it an additional layer of sort of strangeness and creepiness and kind of artificiality, which I think really, really works on a number of levels. And I think because Vincent Price is not an action star, because he has a sort of a very low key presence in many respects, that enables the themes in The Last Man on Earth to really come to the fore. You know, I mean, as much as I'm a fan of the Omega Man, you know, Vincent Price is not tooling around the city in a convertible with a machine gun shooting at mutants. You know, he's basically, it's very low key. And you get a real sense through him of the terror and the horror of his situation. I think it really works.
Basically, if I had to sum it up in a couple of sentences, I'd say that, you know, Charlton Heston couldn't do Forlorn and Vincent Price couldn't do Defiant Machismo, which we've already gone and said, you know, he wasn't an action star. But that essentially, you know, suburban hell, what you've gone and described there, I think is another really great expression. In each film, it opens up with the Robert Neville, or Robert Morgan, as he's called in this film, for whatever reason. The opening 10, 15 minutes, it's a character assessment before they actually sort of go up to, so right, here's the plot, this is why he's in this weird situation of there being no one else around. Vincent Price he has this hangdog look. I mean, he's doing everything by the book. Unlike Charlton Heston, he's really hugely methodical, but you almost sort of wonder why he's still there. He has this look on his face. As we find out later on, he's lost his wife and daughter, and we get to see that all in flashback. But he has this look on his face like, I don't even know why I'm doing this. And in each film, we get the calendar, that good old-fashioned cinema trope, as a reminder to our main characters to, wow, it's been this long since I've last seen another human. But Vincent Price, I've always been a fan of him as an actor, but I can't remember any other time seeing him look as defeated as he does in this film. And he does it right from the very beginning of The Last Man on Earth. So I think for a large part of this film's success is that really insular, I can't stand the world anymore look, but he doesn't know what else to do. He's not going to throw himself off a cliff or anything like that, but he really does have that look as if to say, I don't even know why I'm here. My wife and my daughter are gone. No one else is here. Why am I here?
There's no sort of, green velvet smoking jacket and pirate cuffs for Vincent, is there? He's just going around his normal clothes. He's basically he's almost living this weird sort of parody of what would have been his suburban life. Goes to work in the morning, killing whatever these creatures are, dumps them in the smoking pit, which is very effective, comes home at night, sits in his house, drinks himself into a stupor.
And that's another thing about Neville or Morgan that is in alignment with the book, because the Robert Neville of I Am Legend, the book, is completely methodical. He has everything that he crosses off. So, right, I'm going to look at this sector. Boom. I'm going to get rid of those creatures during the day. Every day, that's what he does. In The Omega Man, Charlton Heston can afford a morning out to go watch, or an afternoon to go watch Woodstock and completely lose track of time, which is not something that Robert Neville's supposed to do. He's been in this situation for 3 years or so, and you would have thought, why would he be that haphazard? But Vincent Price, in The Last Man on Earth, he's doing, this makes sense. He knows that if he's going to survive, then he has to be methodical. He has to be home at such and such a time. And if he's going to get rid of these vampires, then he's got to track every inch of the city. Charlton Heston's going for a jog in his tracksuit, when he feels like it, has a little piece of paper there, which is, I think I've visited that part of the city. Yeah, okay, I think I can cross that off. He's a scientist. He's supposed to be far more methodical, but I guess, the Vincent Price character is also a scientist. It's only the one in the book who isn't. Is that right? Do I recall that correctly?
He is a scientist in the film and a scientist in the book, I'm fairly sure.
I had a feeling that he wasn't a scientist in the book. He was taking a very sort of methodical approach because what would a scientist do? But I don't think he's actually a scientist.
I don't know what it is, but each one of these movies, no matter what one we're looking at, the magic period is about 3 years. And we always get the idea of the calendar and how long it's been. And each one of these seems to be taking 3 years. There's vast differences in so many of these movies. Does he find a dog? Does he not find a dog? Do we get to see his wife come back? Do we get to see his daughter? Is the Ben Cortman character there or is he not? All of these different variables and the way that they mix and match them. But the whole idea of 3 years almost always seems to be in there.
Ben Cortman actually is a much more vivid character in the book, actually, I think, than the film. He's kind of really, Ben Cortman being his neighbour who was his friend, who now basically leads this nightly chorus of the undead, to mill around Morgan's house. And I think in the book there is this real sense of Robert Neville basically trying to find Cortman. Cortman in particular really annoys him. If you can just find where Cortman is sleeping during the day, you can kill him, and that's one less thing tormenting him. And let's be honest, who hasn't had a neighbour you'd like to stake through the heart, for being really annoying,
Not going to say anything in case my neighbours are listening.
I've got a whole household of them on the other side of on the left side of the fence. Yeah, where do they sleep during the day? You've got to find that nest, that's right. And that's the other thing too, having in the book and in the film version, The Last Man on Earth, there is a strong sense, and am I mistaking this, that he's haunted because his daughter died of the plague, whatever that was. And, at that point, society was still sort of vaguely functioning, so there was this ordinance that everyone, the bodies would be dumped in that smoke, which is where that smoking pit comes from, to be disposed of, which is a wonderfully gothic, almost medieval plague sort of sense, sort of sense to the whole thing. But his wife then dies of the plague, and of course he won't feed. He just can't bring himself to throw her into the pit and with this anonymous mass of burning body. So he buries her, and she comes back to life. I always got that sense from the book and the film that she comes back to life. Or at least he has very strong visions of her coming back to life, and the inference I always got was that he had to kill her.
That's exactly the way that I pictured it too, is that each time he doesn't want to do that to his wife, and she comes back and she just is, I love her appearance in the movie, especially. I think it's really super creepy, and that you can tell that she has dug herself up from the grave. Really wonderful.
Yeah, very lucky, very understated.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of the whole idea of the graveyard and having the crypt, the family crypt, where he ends up putting the wife's body after he's staked her. There's a little bit of that in a cutscene from the Omega Man as well. There's a Rosalind Cash. She ends up going and visiting her parents' grave, and she sees someone going into or hears noise from a crypt and sees one of the zombie mutant, the members of the family with a dead baby, and she begins to really empathize more with the family because she gets to see the loss of this baby from this mother. And so, it humanizes her and makes her a little bit more, I mean, she's not unlikable, but she becomes more the voice of reason to that version of Neville, who just wants to go out and murder all of them because he doesn't see the humanity inside of these creatures. To him, they are 100% monster. And yeah, the whole idea of Cortman being this reminder of what his life was, because he's managed to, I mean, I'm going to sound very brutal here, but he's tossed his daughter into the pit, he staked his wife, and then you have Cortman being that reminder of what the world used to be like and coming to his house every single night, pounding on the doors or windows and calling him out. Which is just, for me, that's one of the creepiest things about this whole thing, is just him coming back every single night and calling to Morgan/Neville to come out of the house. And in this one, in Last Man on Earth, I mean, his safety precautions are pretty minimal, that all he has is the garlic wreath and a mirror in front of his door. I don't even know if he locks his door, because later on, Cortman manages to get into the house by just pretty much opening up the doorknob. And I was like, what? Really?
And the garage always seems to be open.
Yeah, come on, dude. You need to have a little bit more security.
He's not tooled up either, is he? In the first one, I don't think there's a single fire. I don't think there's any firearms in it. I mean, he's not the walking arsenal that Charlton is in the Omega Man. That's for sure. Vincent
was looking to go for presidency of the NRA, and they said, "Well, hey, dude, come on, Charlton had an arsenal in the Omega Man. What did you have? You had a few bits of wood and a hammer. You can't go for the NRA."
He does have his own lathe, though, which I thought was pretty cool.
Keeps it right there in the living room.
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
Making sort of bespoke spikes to kill vampires.
Yeah, I love that montage that we were talking about of him going around and killing the vampires, and just that he's the lost man wandering, and you have all the double exposures of the stuff. It almost seems like a drinking montage, like somebody going out and painting the town, or even Ray Milland in The Lost Weekend or something, where it's just like, oh yeah, he went from this bar to this bar, but instead it's Vincent going from this place to this place murdering vampires. And in this one, they do not feel very vampire-like to me. They are very, very zombie-like with the way that they shamble around. And I know that there's been a lot of talk about how influential this movie was on Romero with Night of the Living Dead, and I can completely see that. Also, the other thing that I think helps with this movie to give it that sense of oddness, you're talking about that it's a European or Italian production. So I think a lot of these voices that we're getting are all dubbed in later on. I mean, the guy that has the Cortman character, his voice is so strong and so powerful when it comes out. And I kept looking to see if it was matching up with his mouth during that flashback scene, but I wasn't sure, because most of the time it's just him going, "Morgan, come out, Morgan."
It's interesting that you sort of bring up that all he says is, "Morgan, come out, Morgan." The nature of speech throughout all three of these films. I mean, well, there's nothing in I Am Legend. And in this, there's just a minimal "Morgan, come out, Morgan." So you sort of wonder, well, as part of this disease, was their speech patterns all suppressed? And then we see in the second version, in the Omega Man, where that's not a side effect at all. They're completely in control of their speech faculty and their thinking faculty. So it's interesting that how each, the zombies or the collective of the family, it's different in each retelling of the story. And I was sort of thinking back to another episode of The Booth that we discussed on Mike, where we're talking about Pontypool. And that was definitely a zombie film with a difference. So like here we're talking about, well, speech may or may not be affected by the virus, affected by the disease, whereas what they did with Bruce McDonald did in Pontypool was speech was the carrier of the disease. And I think we discussed at the time of how we found that like a completely wonderful and refreshing take on the whole zombie ethos, but it was all centered around speech in each case.
I mean, not so much the first one, but those voices outside Neville's apartment, and it gets a bit confusing, I know, because he's Morgan. The main character is called Morgan in the last man, the 1964 film, The Last Man on Earth, and he's Richard Neville in the book and in the Omega Man and in that third film that we probably have to discuss, I suppose. And the voices outside Neville's apartment in the Omega Man, that was one of the going back to that thing about what scared me about this film when I first saw it. That really scared me. Those creepy, falsetto, strange voices, and they're deliberately taunting him. You know, I just thought that's such a great aspect of the Omega Man. The other thing, just about The Last Man on Earth, I think it's important to talk about, which is also in the book, is the whole notion that, you know, Morgan is going around, and Vincent Price is going around killing all these creatures because he wants to sort of, you know, he thinks they're an abomination and they're not natural. But as it turns out, you know, there's a third group of, so there's Neville, there's those sort of shuffling zombie vampire-like creatures, and there's a third group of beings who are sort of humans who've managed to evolve beyond the sort of evolve beyond what the Ben Cortmans and the other sort of shuffling sort of vampiric things are into another society, and they see Vincent Price as actually the anomaly, not them. So at the very end, of course, and there's that whole sequence where they send a woman to sort of to be with Morgan, who turns out to be a spy and who's spying for this new society of humans. I suppose you'd call them humans. I mean, that's something again that was very strong in the book. It's very strong in The Last Man on Earth. That notion that actually in the end it's Morgan who is the horrific thing, is the murderer. Is the being that really doesn't belong anymore in that society. It's sort of there a little bit in the Omega Man, and it's probably not really there at all in I Am Legend, the most recent remake, but a very interesting sort of aspect of the film.
Yeah, and that's where the title comes from, and that's what gets missed a lot of times when it comes to these adaptations, is that he has gone around and murdered, whether they are full-blown zombies or if they are kind of this half-vampire creature, he makes no distinction. He murders everything. So I did want to just read the last couple paragraphs of the book, because when he is there about to be killed by this other generation of vampires that have more consciousness, that I think you described them in the outline as militant beatniks, because they're
all dressed like beatniks, yeah.
Yeah, and they all come out and they've got their spears and stuff. It was fantastic.
They all stood looking up at him with their white faces. He stared back, and suddenly he thought, I'm the abnormal one now. Normalcy was a majority concept, the standard of many and not the standard of just one man. Abruptly that realization joined with what he saw on their faces. Awe, fear, shrinking horror, and he knew that they were afraid of him. To them he was some terrible scourge they had never seen, a scourge even worse than the disease they had come to live with. He was an invisible specter who had left for evidence of his existence the bloodless bodies of their loved ones. And he understood what they felt and did not hate them. Robert Neville looked out over the new people of the earth. He knew he did not belong to them. He knew that, like the vampires, he was anathema. and black terror to be destroyed. And abruptly the concept came, amusing to him even in his pain. A coughing chuckle filled his throat. He turned and leaned against the wall while he swallowed the pills. Full circle. A new terror born in death. A new superstition entering the unassailable fortress of forever. I am legend.
So basically, he has become the vampires. He's become the boogeyman to this new generation of people that is living on Earth. They will tell stories of this creature, Robert Neville, for years to come. He's the legend that will give them nightmares because he will come in the night he will come in the day and destroy these things. So that's something that I don't think anybody necessarily gets across that much, though I think Last Man on Earth gets the closest.
And of course, when we get to discuss later on I Am Legend, the Will Smith adaptation, I Am Legend takes on a very different meaning to what it does in the book and in the Last Man on Earth, for that matter.
With a lot of these scripts, the whole idea of the woman being his undoing, it is what the character Ruth here, who shows up, he thinks that he's been alone for these 3 years. He ends up seeing this woman, finding her, or she finds him. He's trying to prove or see if she's really a vampire or not. And she comes up with reasons why what he's doing with the tests aren't necessarily, effective on her and all this kind of stuff. But to me, it's one of those classic tropes of, you can't trust a woman who comes along in one of these stories. And it's kind of a weird thing, but she's the one who ends up being his undoing completely.
Watching The Last Man on Earth and The Omega Man and I Am Legend got me thinking about quote-unquote Last Man on Earth films. So there's quite a few of them. If you think there's The World, the Flesh and the Devil, that 1959 film. There's The Last Woman on Earth, the 1960 Corman film. There's, I suppose, to some degree, there's that terrific New Zealand film, The Quiet Earth.
Yes, I only just watched that a few months ago.
Which I rewatched recently. It's just brilliant. And I suppose to some degree, 28 Days Later in 2002.
Night of the Comet.
The thing about these films is they all encapsulate a sense of how being the last person on Earth or being one of the last people on Earth, what are the psychological impacts of that? But also what struck me thinking about it was that even when there's only 2 or 3 of us left in the world, we just can't get along. We're still it's still paranoia. There's still racial conflict. There can only be 2. There might just be 3 of us, and we still, as humans, find it incredibly hard to get along. The suspicion, the paranoia, and the mental strain that comes from basically that weird paradox of cracking up because there's no one else around, but also when someone else appears, we can't quite handle it and we distrust them, or we focus in on their differences. It's a really interesting sort of aspect of sort of last man / human on Earth films.
The other thing that really comes through in this film that we're going to get a ton when we talk about the Omega Man is the religious symbolism that's happening. I mean, that Vincent Price buys it at a church at the end, and he's pretty much right there on the altar. I mean, it's like, okay, yep, I'm getting what you're throwing down right now. This is, I understand this now.
They're in spades in the Omega Man.
Oh, yeah.
But as you say, it had to end in a church. I wonder if that was part of the requirement of filming in Italy as well.
And speaking of religious symbolism and stuff, one of the authors who ends up becoming one of the most potent religious scholars, I guess, there's always religion going through a lot of his movies, is Bill Blatty. I had no idea that the Omega Man script got polished by Bill Blatty, at least according to Charlton Heston's memoir, his journals. So I was very fascinated to find out, because we talked about the Ninth Configuration on this show, that Heston was actually in talks of doing Twinkle Twinkle Killer Kane years and years before it ended up being the Stacy Keach movie that we know it to be. It was great because he was saying in just a throwaway line in his journal, he's like, oh yeah, we're going to give the script to Bill Blatty to come up with, some final polish on it. And reading the the script versus what we end up seeing in the film, there are a couple differences, including that great line about, are you guys really from the Internal Revenue Service? And I am pretty sure that's a Blatty line, because that is just that kind of twisted humor that he loved to do, especially in something like Killer Kane. So let's talk about the Omega Man and that opening of him in the car, just traveling through an empty Los Angeles. I mean, some really super powerful images that we have in here. Apparently somewhere in the movie you can see people on the streets and stuff, but I am not able to see that at all when I watch this on, well, I almost said on VHS, but on DVD or Blu-ray. I don't see anybody on the streets here. And just those powerful images of a completely empty LA.
And then he just stops, and they have that weird fast they sort of speed up the film as he gets the machine gun, just shoots, and you can just see this figure scrambling in a building above.
I hate that fast motion. That's the one thing I would change if I could change something about this movie.
I quite like it. I think it's just a great little touch in a great little opening, and then he just basically puts the machine gun down again and keeps driving.
First of all, I've got to say I can't hear Theme from a Summer Place without hearing that old guy in Abe Simpson's old age home in The Simpsons.
The guy with the beard?
The theme from a summer place. It's the theme. I like the contrast in the diegetic versus a non-diegetic music in this case. So we see Charlton Heston driving through these empty streets, and we're not quite sure, there's something that's amiss. Why is he the only car out there? And he's listening to this very laid-back, smoothest of smooth jazz. He gets out, takes the machine gun, shoots the silhouettes, continues to drive on, and then we get Ron Grainer's score, which tells you, okay, this story is actually going to be quite dark. I just sort of want to preface, before I sort of go into a little bit more about the actual score, there's a lot of people who've gone and written about film music and said it shouldn't be memorable. If you're listening to the music, then it's not doing its job. I want to call bullshit on that.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the greatest music is music that, we remember, that we hum. I don't see the sin in that, but there seems to be a lot of people out there, possibly not score composers, who say, no, the music should be just there in the background. You shouldn't even notice it. You shouldn't even know it. But some of the most iconic music that people remember are from movies. So I don't know that. I don't understand that mentality. But anyway, just thought I'd put that aside, because there are two main motifs, two main themes that are used a lot in this film. And really, score composers are the original recyclers, because you get these melodies coming in to give you a little bit of melancholy, and later on they've been changed a bit to work as an action piece, or maybe as here's another dark moment in the film, but they're still using the same melodies or motifs. Might just spice it up with a little bit of percussion, or maybe have a few extra horns here and there. And that happens a lot with these two main themes that you hear in the Omega Man. And but for me, the two best uses of it, of these two main themes, are in the opening few minutes of the film. So there's the one main theme, which we get over the opening credits, which gives you a little bit of, well, this guy's okay, but then it turns into this minor key change where you think, the Earth has come to some sort of problem. You're going to discover more about it. So but the other point of music that is used really, really effectively in those opening few minutes, where he crashes the car and Charlton Heston goes into a car lot to go get himself another one. He's having this conversation with himself as if he's talking to the owner of the car lot. And you get this really sad theme that's played on a trumpet. And that's another thing which they keep using throughout the film. And there's something about it that says, he's, if not quite pathetic, but this character, he's talking to himself. I don't want to say sad sack, but it's not sympathy for him, but just more, he's talking to himself, folks. This isn't great. And I think Ron Grainer's score really evokes that very, very well. I'm a big fan of this score. Of course, as the film goes on, there are moments where there's music that you don't necessarily take away your remembering, but the two main motifs, as I'm going on and on about, definitely after the first time I'd seen the film, I was remembering for ages, and probably the only another film from that period, well, maybe it came out a few years later, was Goblin's score for Deep Red. That was one I carried with me for years, and it was like about 25 years before I got to see the film a second time. So, yeah, huge fan of the Ron Grainer score for this film.
That's really interesting. I mean, the music is a hugely evocative piece of this film, isn't it? And I mean, I still remember certain parts of the score with certain scenes, like the scene where, we're jumping well ahead into the film here, but, when Richie's gone to try and find the family and Neville chases him and he goes to where the family are hiding, and you just see this flash of Richie dead, and the way the score drops out from under you, and the use of certain, the swinging music at the very beginning, A Summer Place. Heston in this film, one of the things I love about this film, and rewatching it again recently, it really brought it out to me, is that Neville is basically this aging swinger. He has this. He's not this dour Vincent Price character. He sort of dresses really fantastically, and I just want to say again, green velvet smoking jacket, the pirate cuffs and frilly shirts really get a workout in this. It's obviously was Neville's shtick when society still existed, and he still wears it. He's got this really groovy bachelor apartment in the middle of town. He's got a very laconic sort of attitude. He's a real middle-aged swinger in the middle of this apocalyptic end of the world, where the only other creatures, or so he thinks, are this weird sort of group of homicidal mutants, and he just refuses to sort of shift that sort of vibe. And that's that great scene where he gets into his apartment and he's talking to the statue of Caesar, and he's going, "Hang on, it's Sunday." That's right, Sunday. I always dress for dinner on Sunday, which is where we get that. He dresses up in the crushed black, green velvet jacket and the pirate cuffs, and he's making dinner, and he's got the music on in the background, and it's all very relaxed. He just refuses to change his world and his worldview, and he's sort of the sort of post Summer of Love, middle class swinger habits that he obviously developed before the world basically collapsed. The other aspect of that, I think, that really crisscrosses with that, which he picked up really clearly, Maurice, was he's also cracking up. He's also quite clearly starting to disintegrate as an individual. He's basically talks to himself. He talks to inanimate objects. He talks to the corpse of the car dealer, when he basically goes to get a new car. And that I think comes across also really well in this aspect in this version of Matheson's work, the way that Neville is just totally cracking up, and he's on the verge of I suppose you'd say he's on the verge of going postal. He's gone postal. He's well over. He's basically, and I think these two aspects, they interplay throughout the film, the sort of laconic swinger, devil-may-care attitude, and this really sort of hard-boiled almost sensibility of this man cracking up. And, of course, Heston does that so well because no one could play, cracking up white patriarch like Charlton Heston. He's just fantastic in it.
It's a madhouse! A madhouse! Silent Breed is people! There is no phone ringing, damn it!
Yeah, that phone ringing sequence is just fantastic. I love that. And no one could give a damn it like Charlton Heston could, Again, it's 3 years after the plague. He's been alone for 3 years, and yeah, he's just gone nuts. And I love, to me, there's a real theme in this film. This is 1971 that this movie is coming out, and there's such a theme of the old generation versus the new generation. And is the old generation, we talked on this podcast recently about the Mad Max films, and especially Fury Road, and that whole who were the ones that destroyed the world. And to me, it feels like, this is saying that the old generation destroyed the world, and now it's moving over for a new generation. And him going to see Woodstock is very telling to me, and him mouthing those words and saying this same speech that the characters are saying or the people are saying in that movie. I find that to be a very, very telling thing. But then you also have the danger of this new generation, quote unquote, which is 1971. This is when Charlie Manson and his family are getting sentenced for these crimes that they committed. What was that, 1968, 69? Yeah, we also have the whole idea of the family that wants to break into your house and murder you. It's basically hippies gone wild is what it feels like to me.
See, that's the thing that this film, maybe one of its failings, is in the representation of the family's ethos. So, yes, I guess given that this was made in 1971 and the whole Charlie Manson family debacle was still fresh in America's memory, they obviously did have some basing on them. And yet there's that moment in the film where Anthony Zerbe as Matthias, who does a great job, you're listening, Heather Drain, there's that moment in the film where Anthony Zerbe, where he's saying, right, well, we had industrialization and look where that got us. In fact, he's also editorializing in the flashbacks as the newscaster. I think the last time we hear from him as pre-Black Cape, he's starting to editorialize and say, well, this is it, folks. We've completely fucked the planet up. What are you going to do about it? And you listen to him and you think, well, he's got a point. The old generation has failed. And yet the family is too cultish for us as the audience to feel any sort of real sympathy for him. We side with gun-toting, I'm going to shoot everything that moves Charlton Heston, rather than Matthias, who, as I said, makes a valid point about what the old guard had gone and done. But it's almost like, oh, we'll give him like a minute to make sense. And I think in some ways it could have been maybe an even more interesting film. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a great film, but it would have been interesting if they would have gone and explored that morality a little bit further. But I guess, their angle was, no, let's just make them like the Manson family. And there's just maybe that little bit of script that the Corringtons were able to get into, just sort of get you to think a little bit about morality, I guess.
The family are militant Luddites. The whole idea of anything regarding science is something that they do not want to have any part of. And, we were talking about the whole idea of, Andrew, you brought up like the world of flesh and the devil, and that we are still dealing with racism even after the end of the world. And that very pointedly, the second in charge of the family is this black guy, who,
Lincoln, is it Lincoln Kilpatrick?
Yeah, Lincoln Kilpatrick, who's playing the character of Zachary, and that he is the one that I think in the script they call it a pig's paradise, which is also interesting because you have the connotation of pig as policemen, but then also pig from the Manson family murders. And him saying, he calls it a honky's paradise, which is where Neville is living. And then he wants to go over, get a cannon, and just do away with this whole thing. But Matthias is like, no. We do not truck in in these kind of things. So they end up just getting, like a trebuchet and shooting fire at his apartment later on.
I have a gun in my room. You give me 5 seconds, I'll get it. I'll come back down here. Boom! I'll blow their brains out.
Scott, you just don't get it, do you? You don't.
Put the power to him, brother. Just a little nitro. I can get the cannons out of the old guard armory. We can have him out of there in no time.
I said no. We could. But then the curse would begin all over again, don't you see?
Yes, I see. I see him living high in the light while we rot and hide like grubs. What do you see, brother?
He will be destroyed, brother. He will. But not by guns, not by machines, not by the evil, forbidden things. The tools that destroy the world. The world.
Not necessarily the most effective thing in the world when they do have access to cannons and all of the armaments that Neville himself has access to. But it's interesting to me that they keep talking about how, that he is a child of the wheel, and that basically they want to go all the way back, reset everything to before the invention of the wheel even.
Where did they get that catapult? That's what I want to know. Oh, look, hey, we found a catapult. Cool.
Or, yeah, where they get to know how to make one. I don't know.
There's a couple of points there I think that are really interesting. One is that where does Omega Man sort of sit in, science fiction cinema? And so, you've got So by the early 70s, science fiction cinema, was emerging from being a relatively marginal B-movie category to a sort of more mainstream Hollywood product. And, that's partly, the theme, the Planet of the Apes in 1968 and 2001 were the two game changers in that would originally, that would inevitably lead to science fiction becoming a really popular, big budget cinema product, and would result in films like Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977. But Omega Man belongs to that group, that strange group of science fiction films between 2001, A Space Odyssey, and sort of Star Wars, which are totally run counter to that sort of big budget special effects laden films. They're focused less on these sort of, in some respects, these big extraterrestrial visitors and space travel, and more on themes like environmental destruction, overpopulation, authoritarian rule, all that sort of stuff. And I think that's one of the key themes of certainly science fiction cinema in the first half of Anglo-American science fiction cinema, certainly in the first half of the 1970s, is this really, of the Omega Man is sort of feeds directly into, is this really strong technophobia, and you can see it in just so many of films. The sense that we've got more advanced computers, we've put humans on the moon, but at the same time, those computers are kind of threatening to replace our jobs through automation. And the same technology that we can use for good, it has unleashed absolute carnage in Indochina. And as a part of that, there's that whole theme about technological change causing some sort of unintended environmental catastrophe. And you see that in films like No Blade of Grass in 1970, Silent Running in 1971, that incredibly downbeat 1972 film ZPD, Zero Population Growth. And, of course, in Soylent Green in 1973. It really plays it out, doesn't it, in the Omega Man, the whole anti-technological sort of aspect of it. And just to add another sort of personal interpretation of the family and their anti-technological sort of stance, it's fascinating. I'm fascinated by the fact this is going on, this film, at the height of Vietnam. It would have been May 1970. The war in Cambodia is increasing. The American, Washington has been basically bombing Cambodia since 1969. The family really remind me of the Khmer Rouge in the sense that they are this absolutely peasant guerrilla force. When they eventually overthrew the government in Cambodia in 1975, it was like return to year zero. We're going to eliminate all technology. The cities are evil. We're going to build a new society which is based on sort of anti-technological precedents, amongst many other things. And so the family are totally like this. They won't use technology. They basically don't believe in advanced civilization. The Khmer Rouge rounded up and murdered anyone they discovered who had education, scientists, technologists. Of course, there's that really key phrase in the Omega Man when Matthias is, to that one point with a family have caught Neville and they're talking to him, and Matthias says, definition of a scientist, a man who understands nothing until there was nothing to understand. They're so Khmer Rouge. And in this kind of film, Heston is like this sort of deep penetration unit in Vietnam. He's behind enemy lines waging this guerrilla war against the sort of Khmer Rouge, like the family. There's so many interesting things going on in this film.
As soon as you mentioned Luddite, Mike, I thought the exact same thing about the Khmer Rouge. A few weeks ago on the See Here podcast, we spoke about a film called Don't Think I've Forgotten the Lost Rock and Roll of Cambodia. And that film, it's an absolutely excellent documentary. If you haven't seen it, I urge anyone out there to track that one down. But the director, I think John Perozzi was his name, he basically sort of takes a story of how Cambodia was this wonderful, flowering, very cultural place, and music was actively encouraged by the Prince Sihanouk. And it sort of speaks about all these wonderful musical types who, in the West, a lot of us had never heard of. And then the latter part of the film goes very dark once it shows, Pol Pot even before then, where there was a military coup in 1970, and then by 1975, when Pol Pot takes over, and it's the whole program of agrarian socialism. And once again, to your point, Andrew, they said if you're scientific, or if you're a theologist, or you're a businessman, or heaven help, if you actually sort of go too far into the ideology, the Marxist ideology, then you're a threat because you're thinking, we want you to think this way. We're going to send a lot of you out to the country and you're going to be just digging up the fields, and we're going to write these propaganda, jingoistic laden songs, and you're going to fall for it. And this is the way how we want it to be. We don't want anyone from the outside. We want to get rid of all Western influence, all Western technology. And there I was sort of thinking, oh, really? Could I compare that story to this? But I'm glad that you went there first, Andrew, because that's the first thing that came to my mind.
Much like Matthias has a point. You know, the scientists basically unleashed this. I mean, I think in the Omega Man, the contagion, whatever has happened, and there's less of a sort of philosophical bent in the Omega Man as to whether the family are zombies or vampires or some sort of supernatural thing, or they're just there and Charlton wants to kill them all. You know, the scientists have basically unleashed some sort of plague that happens when there's a Sino-Soviet border war, which escalates into some sort of world war. You know, the scientists basically destroyed the Earth, and I suppose the corollary with Cambodia, and I've seen that documentary. Don't think I've forgotten, and sort of written quite a bit about that period of Khmer music before the Khmer Rouge came in. Cambodia it had a lot of great things, and obviously no support there for the Khmer Rouge, but it was also a deeply corrupt country. It was ruled by, basically a bottom-feeding elite who, rifled the country, were very repressive. I mean, the Khmer Rouge didn't pop out of nowhere. Corruption, poverty, and, massive bombing basically helped give them birth. But, I mean, so, yes, the seeds of the current society are then into the next society, aren't they? And so Matthias is rightly critical of technology in some respects and all the things that have happened leading up to the situation they're in now. From Matthias and them, that it's a pretty miserable life they have. You know, and as I think Brother Zachary says, we live like grubs, underground, only coming out at night, while he lives up in that building in that honky paradise. Forget the old ways, brother. But anyway, yes, it's terrific.
Matthias has no problem getting over the racial politics because he's white, and now he's even more white than white. And I find it very interesting, too, that the whole family is very culturally diverse. When you look at, there's a woman in there who has very Native American features, and then, again, she's bleached white. Everybody is bleached white in this group. They all should be quote unquote equal, even though it feels like there is a leader in a very hierarchical kind of thing going on with Matthias at the top, and then we go on down from there.
So he's becoming exactly what it was that he criticized. And just sort of coming back to the whole point about them rejecting everything and throwing the baby out with the bathwater technology wise, Matthias's instrument of being able to put his message out was through the media. And so as much as, he says, well, technology has really screwed us up, but it was all or nothing. He was able to editorialize, as I mentioned before, in the last moment that we see of him in the film before he mutates, if you want to call it like that. And he was able to say what he wants and get that message out. I mean, okay, there's no one to give that message out to, but rather than look for technology that will serve him and his people well, he says, no, we'll absolutely reject it all. And that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I'm not saying that that's a script problem, that the story is told as it needs to be told, but it just seems to me peculiar that he would take that all or nothing approach. And probably in a contemporary text, I felt the same way about Lars von Trier and his Dogma Manifesto.
Well, and not only are they railing against technology, but it's also a culture and literature and art and everything, because they burn down the libraries. They are having book burning rallies, and they are burning up artwork. And that's one of the things that's in Neville's apartment, is he's got a lot of great works of art that he's saved from the family inside of his apartment, and that's what they go after. They have to make a display. When they finally get into his apartment, they wait until he's back, and then they go through and destroy everything inside of the apartment to make sure that they show him, that they demonstrate to him that they are capable of destroying the last remnants of culture that he has managed to safeguard from them. So it's not just that technology thing. They're going after anything that shows man's beauty, man's progress, anything that will show what they are capable of doing. I'm surprised that they haven't gone into the movie theater and burned up that copy of Woodstock. I'm also very surprised that Neville hasn't gone through, any of the archives. I mean, the film schools are right there. He could go through like UCLA and maybe get some really good other films, but instead I guess he wants something that's long, maybe he wants to take a nap in the middle of it. I'm not sure, because I can't imagine watching Woodstock every day, or maybe he sees it once a week or something for 3 years.
I couldn't imagine watching it more than once, actually. So that would be my own type of dystopian hell. Having to watch the film Woodstock every single day. To read another layer into this too, it's really interesting to look at where this film occurs too in Heston's development. I mean, as I think. No support to Heston's pro-gun views, but it is and also a pity in some respects that probably the dominant image we now have of Heston is that interview in is it Bowling for Columbine, where basically Mike Moore quizzes him on the Columbine shooting, and Heston, who I think may have had early onset Alzheimer's by that stage.
To me, that's one of the worst things in the entire world, is seeing that attack interview that he does with Heston. It's a real gotcha moment, and it's.
As I say, I have no truck with Heston's pro-gun views at all. But I think more to the point, it's sort of obscured the fact that Heston was in some terrific films, also in a lot of crap, like every single other actor. The other thing I think it obscures too is the fact that in the 1960s he was a heavyweight liberal. He was a Democrat. He supported civil rights. He was in favor of gun control.
He was the head of SAG for a long time. He was the guy.
Yeah, he marched with Martin Luther King at that big Washington rally. I think it was Washington. And of course, like a lot of people, in the late 60s, he sort of went to the right. He would go on to support Reagan. He would go on to become head of the NRA, all those kind of things. But I mean, I think it's interesting. Reading a bit about Heston, he initially opposed Vietnam, the American intervention in Vietnam, and then he supported it. He sort of switched over to the right about 1971, which is when the Amiga Man came out, which sort of, to me, strengthens that view of the Amiga Man as almost being a text about, Heston waging war against the counterculture and against the cultural nihilism that's come from it. And I think that also is very much in the fact that his apartment is full of all this wonderful old, what at a certain point in history people would have called dead white male culture, but, modernist culture, the Cubist paintings, the books, all that sort of stuff. He's a real old conservative traditionalist modernist in that respect. I think it's fascinating where that film comes through in his political development. And looking at that book you sent us, Mike, An Actor's Life, which I must read in more detail. It was kind of fascinating book. He actually really put a lot of his a personal grunt behind the Amiga Man. I mean, he'd liked the Matheson book, I Am Legend. He pushed to try and get the Amiga Man made. He took a really direct role in getting it made. There's heaps of diary entries. I mean, and an actor's life is basically, I should have said an actor's life is basically Heston's diary with editorialized parts throughout it where he's sort of coming in later in life saying, oh, no, I don't think this now. So he took a really prominent role in getting Rosalind Cash cast in the role that she had as Lisa, which is terrific part in the film. We should talk about that more. And at one point he sort of thought, he actually says at one point, which is interesting, this is another of and he's saying this about the Amiga Man, this is another of the not very long list of films I have more or less personally conceived and may turn out to be the best of them. Of course, there's then a footnote saying, I didn't really like it in retrospect. But yeah, he really put a lot of his own grunt into it.
Yeah, the Rosalind Cash character, she's basically just a Black Panther walking in off the street and popping into this movie, which is great. And it's like the slang, everything, like calling him mother. I mean, it kind of reminded me, Maurice, of when we talked about Trouble Man. I mean, it's like she and Mr. T, I think, would have made a real power couple.
Oh, yeah.
But she is fantastic that she is super militant and, talks about the man. Like when she introduces him to the rest of the group that she has, which ironically enough is very much like a family. There's a stand-in father, a stand-in mother, which she is, and a whole bunch of children. She says that I want you to meet the man, as in the man, as in the power structure, as in the patriarch, as in the police, as in all of these things, the way that she sets him up as that role. So, we've talked about him kind of fitting into that. When she's on the back of that motorbike and just like, don't try to be cute because I can splatter your brains all over the place. It's just like, man, this is a real kick-ass chick.
Any talk as to whether Pam Grier was ever thought of for the role?
I'm not that I know of. I don't think she really kind of came into her own until a few years after that. There was somebody else that he was talking about, and I remember that he was talking about Diane Carroll in the role, but fought for Rosalind Cash to be in there. And then apparently Cash and the director didn't necessarily get along as well as they possibly could have, which is a shame.
Charlton's pretty critical of the director. I think, the director apparently had a bit of a temper problem, I think. Boris Sagal.
Kind of dismissed him as a television director, unfortunately, because I know he had done a bunch of other stuff, and some of it very good, some of it maybe not so good, but I'm trying to remember, was it Black Noon that he ended up doing? There were some good TV movies in there, and of course he directed a couple Columbo episodes, so he's okay by me in my book.
Does the film actually look like a TV movie to you? I can't decide. I mean, I've never seen it on the big screen. It's always been on DVD or on a TV showing, and it just might be a common element of a lot of films at that time, that sort of look, that Warner Brothers look maybe. But there was something about it that made me think, yeah, this looks slightly like a television movie. And I don't have any problem with that, but does it look more that way to you than a cinematic film?
I don't know. It sort of has made for television aspects, I suppose. The lighting is one of them. I also think Sagal injects some good action scenes into it. I mean, there's there's some of that has a sort of slightly made for TV feel to me.
Maybe coming back to the score, there might be aspects of that score by Ron Grainer that sounds like it was being used in a lot of television shows at the time. I'm thinking of the theme from The Streets of San Francisco. There's a little bit of that during the action sequences where Rosalind Cash is on the motorbike with Charlton Heston getting out of that football stadium. And there's just something about that reminds me of TV shows like that. And once again, not a bad thing, just saying that, yeah, some sort of level of similarity. And I know that we've discussed film scores on previous shows that have been on, Mike. And this one, like coming back to that 1970s sound, I mean, I think I've said in previous shows where there were composers like Lalo Schifrin that were sort of going for that very funky edge. In like we discussed Charlie Varick, and I'm pretty sure in things like Dirty Harry, he's going for something that's of a funk bent. And this, nothing bad on the score because I love it, but there were moments where it sounded like, yeah, we're going for something that's a little bit funky, but not quite at that level that Lalo Schifrin had been influenced by, so the blaxploitation composers.
And man, we were talking about the religious symbolism before. This movie is lousy with it. When they capture Neville and they put him in the back of this cart, and apparently I didn't pick this up, but in the script they're talking about that they are throwing computer papers, basically printouts at him when he's in the back of that, or that's also the hat that he's wearing is a big computer printout. So it's this kind of, looks very medieval, the conic hat that they put on him, this almost dunce cap, as they're rolling him into the stadium. And when they get him, they have his arms outstretched when they're going to burn him in the stadium, kind of burn him as a heretic. And then also when he goes and Rosalind Cash helps rescue him along with Dutch, who's played by Paul Koslow, when she has him put his hands up, she tells him they were going to crucify you, baby. And it's just like, yep, okay, we're going to get that time and time again. And then, of course, the end of the film, when his arms are outstretched and he's in the fountain and I think he's even crossed his ankles. It's such a Christ-like pose. It's ridiculous.
It was the era of Hair and Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar. So for an era that was in some ways trying to rid itself of theological mainstream society, but those musicals were all over the place. So it was still very big in popular culture. So in that way, it sort of makes sense that it was there.
Are you God? That little girl asks Charlton Heston. The little girl is one of the many survivors of is one of that ragtag hippie-ish group of survivors who live on the outskirts of town. Are you God? Oh, look, he gives his blood to save others. I mean, his blood, as he said, his blood is the serum, because he's Neville. For those who haven't seen it, Neville, of course, is a scientist before the end of the world, and there's that contagion from the Sino-Russian War, and that's a very made-for-TV aspect of it. Actually, is just we're in the laboratory with Heston watching Matthias on TV, and then someone rings up and he says, "I'll try batch 3845," and he's in a helicopter taking the batch of serum to somewhere. We don't need to know that. The helicopter crashes because the pilot gets the plague, and just before he blacks out, Heston injects himself with what he's not sure will be a successful serum to the plague or not, and it turns out that it is, and so he's immune, and his blood is the future of humankind. His blood can basically, and there's a whole part of the film where they're basically trying to make antibodies from his, or a serum from his blood for Lisa's brother who's affected with the plague. And then at the very end, before he dies, he passes a bottle of the serum to Dutch, who I believe you were almost going to, Paul Kelso, who I believe you were almost going to interview for this podcast.
That was a real shame. I was talking with his wife back in December, and I just was about to interview him, and she's like, "Oh, wait, no, we've got family in from out of town. Let's talk again in a couple weeks." So I talked again, I think right after Christmas, and it was like, no, not yet. We'll talk very soon. Call me, basically email me again in another week or two. Emailed her again. I didn't hear anything back. And then I started to see on Facebook rumors that he had passed away, which of course he did. So that was, such a shame. I mean, he was such a great actor. And from what I understand, he was a heck of a guy too. And I only wish I could have heard some of the stories that he had to tell. I know one story that he tells in Shock Cinema is that, again, with Heston being such a big mucky muck and sag, that Kelso was, screwed over on a previous film with some royalties that he was owed with actually his salary, and Heston managed to get the salary paid to him and all the rest of the actors that were owed their back salary. So he was kind of sticking up for his own, for his fellow actors as well as for his fellow co-star.
Go Charlton.
There's some weird lines in here too where he says to Lisa, the Rosalind Cash character, "Where'd you ever see a stream of fish in Harlem?" And I was just like, that's really kind of tone deaf for him to say that. Plus, they're in Los Angeles, so wouldn't he say, "Do you ever see a stream of fish in Watts or Compton or something like that?" It doesn't make any sense that he's like assuming that she's from Harlem. It's like, come on, dude, that's a little racist.
It's playing into the zeitgeist, isn't it? That blaxploitation zeitgeist, which was sort of very New York based. I think a lot of those blaxploitation films, weren't they mainly shot in New York, or were a lot of them shot in LA as well?
Yeah, it was LA and New York, just like the films noir, where it's like, okay, they had a little bit of a different feel one to the other depending on where they were, and maybe a little San Francisco, but pretty much those two urban areas were where we were seeing most of our blaxploitation.
Yes, and you could really go to town on the fact that Lisa then turns into the family at one of the members of the family, and then is white for a while. And then Charlton has to save her.
Yeah, well, a lot of these movies, it feels like we've got the white savior going on. I mean, even in The Last Man on Earth, he goes and basically goes up to the Ruth character in that and injects his blood into her, and he's like, "I've cured you." And it's like, oh, okay. It's up to the white guy to save the woman, no matter what it is.
And scientifically, all it ever takes is one injection to do it.
In fact, all the Omega Man, what the Omega Man really needed on one of those needles was a big red sign that said, serum.
In case of an emergency break glass.
Something like that. And actually, now that we're talking about it, there are made-for-TV aspects of this film. There should have been, but that's one of them is the whole thing about... But he is, again, going back to that point, Heston is like this weird, middle-aged, slightly cracked up swinger, tone-deaf swinger. He basically is he's in his apartment with his gear and his art, and he's got that big screen that he records himself on. And if that's not, that big television screen that he records himself on, and if that's not a sort of an early 70s swinger sort of thing, I don't know what is.
Do you think he was making sex tapes before the apocalypse? Neville
swung. I'm absolutely sure of it.
But we never hear about his wife and kid in this, which I find very interesting too, that I don't think... Yeah, he was leading a bachelor life, and I don't think that we could have accepted, because I know some people couldn't accept anyway, this whole idea of him and Rosalind Cash having a romance, and, we know they are down to fuck in this movie. They are definitely fucking in this, and that is, in 1971, you gotta be fucking crazy to put that up on screen. I mean, we're just a few years away from, north of the interracial kiss between Uhura and Kirk. I mean, and here we have these characters that are just boning in this movie. It's like, wow, but I don't think that we would have accepted it even more if he had had a wife and kid, that he ends up having sex with this other woman. He has to be a bachelor in this for us to even begin to accept that he has a life outside of them.
And it's never made a big deal of, which is something that I really, really liked.
I appreciate that too. I mean, there are those little weird things like him cutting her down about Harlem and stuff, and her with her patter of Black Power, but it's not like, this is a big deal that we're having sex and we're breaking taboos. None of that stuff is going on.
He'll swing with whatever. He would have slept with whatever woman basically appeared.
Actually, I want to ask you two guys a question. I don't know whether you've ever donated blood or not, but have you ever gone and taken your shirt off while you've donated blood? Because that happens twice in this movie. And, if I've gone to donate blood here at the Red Cross, I can't recall whether anyone's gone and said anything more than just roll up your sleeve. But, I guess I don't have a chest as good as Heston.
I'm 47 years old. There's no way I'm going to look as good as Heston did in 3 years. This guy's 50 years old, and he's taken off his shirt in here. He's took it off in Planet of the Apes. I mean, if you're built like that, you got to take it off. Show it off a little. Flaunt it.
Is there any truth to the rumor that somewhere deep in the soundtrack you can hear him saying, yeah, take that, Burt Lancaster?
Was he ever in a film with Burt Lancaster?
Oh, man, I don't think the two egos could have taken it, but if there is, I want to see it. A 70mm widescreen presentation.
I do have to say I felt really bad for Heston all the times that he's writing about that Antony and Cleopatra movie that he wants to do, and then when it comes out, it completely tanks, and he's just like, oh, well, didn't work. It's like, oh, man, I mean, his whole diaries, I mean, they're just so many disappointments in there, and it just shows how he's scrambling to keep working as an actor through all that. He's got like 4 or 5 different projects that he's working on at any one time.
Which is the actor's life, I suppose. All the successful actors. I mean, there's a sense, I think, too, that Hollywood is changing in the early 70s, and he's scrambling to try and keep up with that transition. He's not as big a star as he was, early on.
Doing my research, it looks like other than clip movies, we never got Heston and Lancaster in the same place at the same time. We're going to take a break and play an interview with one of the screenwriters of the Omega Man, Ms. Joyce Corrington, and we'll be back with that right after these brief messages.
Who is Carl Kolchak?
He's a reporter.
Now that is news, Vincenzo. News! And we are a newspaper. We are supposed to print news, not suppress it.
With the INS.
What's an INS?
Independent News Service, sir, founded in 1904 by Enrico Paluzzi.
Who seems to have a nose for the strange and unusual.
Well, last year in Las Vegas, I uncovered a series of murders that turned out to have been committed by a vampire.
And what is the Kolchak tapes?
It's a podcast.
All about Carl Kolchak.
What's a Kolchak?
The Night Stalker.
And where can you get it?
On iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at www.kolchaktapes.com.
As foolish a game as any that Gory the Ghoul could make up.
It's not easy having a good time. And it's not cheap either. Every week, the Projection Booth brings you a new show, possibly even two, focusing on all genres of cinema. If you've sat through the 7-hour Conan episode, the 6-hour Star Wars episode, or even the hour-long Superman episode, you know that Mike and his co-host put forth a lot of work into researching the movies, tracking down the interview subjects, and putting together one of the best podcasts on the internet. Now I'm asking you if you can repay all that hard work by giving back to the Projection Booth. The show has a Patreon fundraiser at Patreon. That's patreon.com/projection booth. You can donate as little as $1 a month. That's $12 a year. At least 50 great shows and 2 terrible ones. That's the price of 2 matinee tickets. Now isn't the Projection Booth worth it? Once again, that's patreon.com/projection booth. Donate today. It's the right thing to do.
Kirsten Costello is a model. She has the face people want. She has the look people desire. But now, something else wants her look. Something wants her face. Something not human. Night Waves, the debut novel from David Irons, is a new chapter in terror. Night Waves, the novel. From Cosmic Egg, an imprint of John Hunt Publications. Available now at all good bookshops.
I'm Chris Cooling from Forgotten TV, and you're listening to The Projection Booth, the ultimate movie podcast. You like classic movies? How about classic TV? Over at Forgotten TV, I've covered everything from obscure Saturday morning TV to short-lived shows like Otherworld, The Phoenix, The Highwayman, and Cliffhangers. You can find the show over at Forgotten.tv or at all the usual podcast places. I hope you'll join me soon at Forgotten TV.
Did your writing career and meeting your husband, did those go part and parcel, or were you already writing before you met him?
I was actually a chemical engineering major at Rice when I met Bill. And I worked in the industry for a number of years, and then I went back and got my doctorate in chemistry and taught for 10 years. So mostly early on, I helped Bill by editing his work. It wasn't until we got into doing movies and such, because Bill really didn't take it seriously and didn't want to think about it. He could knock out anything in dialogue in a wonderful skill, but I became the plotter. So we would get a project, I would do a detailed scene outline, and then he would turn it into dialogue, and that was how we wound up working together.
Well, how did you and Bill meet?
Well, we were at Rice together. He was a graduate student, and I was an undergraduate student.
I can't believe you were a scientist. That's such a different thing than what you ended up doing for the majority of your career, I'd imagine.
I don't think my science particularly informed much of anything, except maybe a Mega Man. There we used a little bit of what my attitude toward science was. But I think you just, if you have a brain that organizes well, then you can be a good storyteller. At least that was my function, so it worked out okay.
We talked a little bit before I started recording as far as how you broke into show business. What was that big moment for you like?
Bill was writing, and he had published a couple of novels, and we were at home one evening, and we got a call, and he said, "This is Roger Corman." And Bill and I are not film buffs, so we had no idea he was a major producer-director. So Roger said, "Well, I read one of your novels," and I'm sure it was his development director did it, since producers never read anything in my experience. And he said, "I think you have a very cinematographic imagination. Would you like to do a movie script?" And Bill said, "No, not especially." So I sort of nudged him and said, "Oh, yes, you do." So they talked a while, and Roger said, "Well, I've always wanted to do a film about von Richthofen. Do you know anything about him?" And Bill modestly said, "Everything." Roger was sort of taken aback, and Bill said, "Well, when Bill was young, he had asthma very badly. Being confined to bed, he took up building model World War II airplanes, little plastic airplanes, and so he knew all about von Richthofen." So Roger, to test him, said, "Okay, well, how did he die?" And Bill said, "Well, there are three theories." It gave him the three theories, and Roger said, "Hey, you really do know everything about him." So we talked about it, and Bill said he'd think about it, and then he called his friend Larry McMurtry, who had been in graduate school with Bill at Rice, and Larry said, "Oh, hell, Bill, go ahead and write a movie script." He said, "Your writing will still be there. You know, it doesn't kill you to do a script. You just earn money from it." So Bill did a script and sent it in to Roger, and then Roger called up and said, "Have you ever seen a scenario?" And Bill said, "No." He said, "Well, they usually run about 120 pages, and this is 240 pages, so you're like twice too long." So that was where I had to come in on the first thing, because Bill hated to edit his work. Once it was like not just cutting, bleeding, it was like cutting muscle to edit his work. So I helped cut it down, and went out to the story meeting with Roger and Frances Doyle, this lady who did development, and we had story meetings on it. And while we were out there, we were at Nate Niles, it's a delicatessen in Beverly Hills, and an agent walks by, and Roger waves him over and said, "This is your lucky day. It's the Corringtons, and they don't have an agent." So we then acquired an agent who then, while we were still out interviewing, working on von Richthofen and Brown, came up with an interview with Walter Seltzer to do what became a Mega Man. So, and all of a sudden, after having done a Mega Man, we became science fiction writers. We'd never done it before, but Hollywood tends to want to categorize you rather quickly. So we then got various offers to do various science fiction projects after that.
What was it like when you were editing Bill's work? I mean, sometimes I love my editors. Sometimes it feels like they're murdering my children.
Oh, yes. Bill definitely felt that way, but he left it to me. As I say, he didn't take... We would argue more over his books, you know, when I'd edit something there. He didn't take the movie writing seriously, so it didn't matter to him too much one way or the other.
How did you go about adapting I Am Legend for the Mega Man?
It was a very short story, and it had vampires in it, and I didn't particularly want to use vampires. So I came up with the idea of biological warfare. Then Bill came up with the weird contact lenses that were mirrors that gave your villains really spooky qualities. Then we had to stretch it out because it wasn't long enough to be a real movie. You know, a movie is a novella, not a short story. So we came up with the people who were the young people who weren't quite turned. And also we had to put in a love interest, and it's like, because there wasn't any love interest in the short story. So we said, well, okay, when the last man on Earth meets the last woman on Earth, how could you make this a difficult romance? And so I was teaching at a black university at the time, and I said, oh, we'll make her black. So, and we got this wonderful feisty actress who played the role to perfection. And I believe we won the Beverly Hills NAACP award for that year because it was one of the first on-screen black-white romances, you know. So, but we took the character of Charlton Heston's character, and we sort of divided him down the middle between. We did it symbolically with his apartment. With part of it was his science lab, and part of it was humanities function. So that was sort of Bill and my twining, you know. I did the science part, he did the humanities part. But it was fun to do. We always had fun because we lived in New Orleans at the time, and they would fly us out for story meetings and put us up at a nice hotel, and we go to a nice restaurant and come home and knock off our work, you know. And it was very simple. It was 120 pages, goodness. Well, later we got into doing soap opera where you're doing an hour a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year. That's writing. That's exhausting. 220 pages is nothing. In fact, it was, we said that once in an interview to a New Orleans paper, and our agent said, oh, for God's sakes, they pay you a lot of money. Don't say that. Don't say that it's easy. And don't give them more than like 10 or 15 pages at a time, because we back out a script. We literally, like when we did, what was it? It was Planet of the Apes. The producer insisted that we fly out with the pages every week. And I told Bill I was teaching. I said, I'm not going to do that. That's stupid. He was in law school at the time. He'd given up his teaching position, go back to law school. So he said, well, I can catch an early morning flight because of the time difference. I could be in L.A., hand over the pages, and the producer would take them and then say, go to lunch and come back. And Bill would come back and he would look at it and say, oh, yeah, they're fine. Okay, go back and keep going. But we would have written the whole thing, and he'd take out like 10 or 15 pages. It was Arthur Jacobs who was the producer. His name finally came back to me. Poor guy. He was actually sick of the ape movies because at the end, as you notice, at the end of the second one, he blew up the earth because he didn't want to do any more sequels. And the studio told him, well, we don't care if you blew up the earth. You figure it out. We want another sequel. So by the time we'd gotten to the fifth one with him, well, we only did the fifth one, but by the time he got to the fifth one, he was so sick of it. And he also died shortly afterwards of a heart attack, so he was not a well person. But it was a pretty weird experience of typical Hollywood excess, paying for a first-class Delta flight out once a week to hand over pages.
I can't believe you guys were, well, Bill being in school and you teaching and balancing that with the writing at the same time. I mean, some people, that's their only job is to be the screenwriter. Yeah, well, I'm sure if they take it very seriously, it's, it could be. So we never took it too seriously. It was fun. I've always had fun. The only time I didn't have fun was when we did General Hospital, and that was because the producer was a pain in the neck. But we always had fun doing it. So, what was your relationship like with Walter Seltzer? He was very nice. Chuck Heston had bought the rights to this movie, to Omega Man, and he had, like hands-on doing it. So we were over to his house and met him a couple of times and all, and he was very nice. There was always sort of a pane of glass. You never felt like you got past that public person, but very nice, and we had a good time with it. It was not at all hard working with them. They did a polish after we turned in the script because they thought it needed more humor, and they put in some really stupid lines, which when we saw the movie we cringed at. But basically, they did our show, which you can't say everything you write because there was a tendency to, even though we always got written by credits, the prime credits. Sometimes they would mess around with it, like when we did Boxcar Bertha for Roger Corman. Martin Scorsese directed. It was the last one he directed before he got famous with Mean Streets. And I don't know whether it was Roger or whether it was Scorsese, but it was supposed to be a feminist picture. In fact, Julie Corman, Roger's wife, was the one who had come up with the idea. And it's supposed to be a feminist picture. Boxcar Bertha is the title. Well, the way we played it was that she was the brains behind Paul, that David Carradine would get himself in some fix, and then Bertha would get him out of it. Well, they kept cutting out the ends of scenes where she wasn't the savior. It was just David Carradine's picture, We never had any input in the production of any movie except a little bit with Bodmer, and Brown, but that was just an accident. They were filming in Ireland, and Roger wanted some additional scenes. So Bill said, oh, I could do that if you pay our way over. So we got a free trip over just to be there, But normally we'd give the script to the producer and never see it again until a year or two later. We'd go look at our local movie theater. So, well, I guess I should ask, what were your impressions when you finally saw the Omega Man? Were you happy with what they did other than the comedy bits? Yeah, the comedy bits really made us cringe. Like at one point there was a line about, told you have to, you have to leave, or I don't know what prompted it, but the line was, what, without my baby blue blanket? It's like, what? Where did that come from? That's so stupid. But the thing, I guess, that distressed us a little bit, but we told Charlton Heston we were using the symbol of the hero's blood saves humanity, and it was like the blood of Christ. And so when he dies at the end, he knew he was dying like a Christ figure. Well, the trouble was, he handed up. He died, and he died, and he died, and he died. So, other than that, it was. Oh, and another thing that really irritated me was that the girl, it was Rosalind Cash, his love interest.
introduced herself as, there's a scene where he's been captured, and he's in a stadium, and he's about to be, I don't know, crucified or killed or something, and suddenly the stadium lights come on. And Rosalind was the one who did it because she told him she had been an electrical engineering student at Berkeley, and she had wired the generators or something to make the lights come on. I don't know. And they changed it to a guy because obviously a girl couldn't be an engineer, and that really irritated me, because I was an engineer. I'd worked in the industry, so. But other than those two things, or three things with the stupid humor, it was a pretty good production.
Well, that would have been the perfect time for it, too. I mean, the feminist revolution was ongoing at that point.
Well, Hollywood did not recognize that at the time. They were just beginning to recognize females.
Moving on to Battle for the Planet of the Apes, you said that it wasn't necessarily the easiest thing, that Jacobs wasn't necessarily that into it at the time. It must have been kind of strange because you're almost written into a corner with something like that because of the way that time is cyclical. Did you have to go back and watch all the original movies and then try to figure out where yours would fit in?
Well, we did because we had never seen them. So when he brought us out, he set us up to, screen the movies, and we saw them. Mostly, I got the idea from, we were trying to think of, the writer up to that point, Paul Dean, I believe it was, had done the other 4 scripts, and he had a nervous breakdown or something because he had started a 5th script, and he had the apes suddenly going to like a corrupt Roman court. Caesar was like Caesar, like a Roman emperor, and it was like, what? They'd just gotten their freedom. How'd you get there? So I was talking to my hairdresser, who was a great fan of the apes. And I said, well, what is it you like about these movies? And he said, well, the apes have such innocence. And so that hit me then, okay, so we did a Cain and Abel story. We did the first ape killing an ape. And then some young man, I can't remember his name, he did a PhD dissertation on it and then later published it as a book. And I met it one time when I was out there, did a Blu-ray version of the ape movies, and they wanted to talk to me about it, and he was there. So nice young man, but he had this theory that it was all about racial politics of the time, and I said, well, it may have been, in Paul Dean's mind, and certainly that was, evident in the way the different quality of the apes behaved and everything. But I said, we were doing Cain and Abel, and he just didn't really want to hear that because it didn't fit into his PhD dissertation. But it was I said, well, I was teaching at a black university at the time, so I'm sure some of that came in. So he jumped on that, thought that was important in his interpretation of the film.
Well, there's definitely a lot of racial politics in the arena as well.
Oh, my goodness, you saw the arena?
Yeah, it's been a while, but yeah, I mean, I would watch anything with Pam Grier in it.
That's funny. I'm sitting here looking at a poster, and it's retitled Naked Warriors. These are 2 almost nude women fighting. It's funny because, that was another one that they totally changed the ending of and the beginning. It was supposed to be in the arena, and they turned it into just right at the end. I mean, there was no way that you can escape the Roman Empire. It stretched from Persia to Brittany at the time, and yet they had them, running through this all escape thing at the end. So that didn't make too much sense. But what the heck? It was the second thing we wrote, and it was funny because when you write a movie in the old days, nowadays everything is on tape so you can see it, but you'd be in a movie and you'd see it and it'd go away and you'd never have a chance to see it again. Well, one time we saw the arena was coming on television or something, and so we rushed home to see it. This was like years after having seen it, and we think we're going to be thrilled by it, and it's like it's so campy. I mean, we were just hilarious. We thought it was hilarious. It wasn't meant to be that way, but it was. So.
What was your experience like working on Killer Bees?
Oh, yeah, that was a good. That has a backstory. that has nothing to do with writing it at all. We got a call. We were sitting here in New Orleans, and we got a call from the producer set up by our agent, and he said, Hitchcock's Birds? I want something like that with bees. And that, again, is where my science background came in, because I knew I had been reading about the killer bees that had come from Africa into South America. They were making their way, up. So that gave us the theme for it. But I remember sitting on the extension phone in the bedroom. We have an old house. It was built in 1915. And when we renovated it, we took all the old screens off, thinking, well, we're always going to use air conditioning. Well, keep the windows closed. Well, we found that air conditioning was $1,000 a month, so we tended to keep the windows open when it could. Well, we have big tree roaches in New Orleans, big, like 1.5 inch roaches. They fly through the air at night. And it used to be that when I'd come up to the bedroom at night and there'd be one on the ceiling, I'd go into this, Bill, there's a roach on the ceiling, you gotta come kill it thing, But I'm sitting there talking to the producer on Killer Bees, and a roach flies in the window and lands in my hair. I knock it to the floor and I stomp on it, and I don't miss a beat with what I'm talking about. So I decided this was a total affectation on my part, But that was our first and only TV movie, and it was an interesting experience. Except at the end, I had visualized. You go up into the attic, and the whole attic is supposed to be a hive. And I had seen it in visually like a movie, But when you're looking at it on a little TV screen, it looked, So it wasn't the climax that I expected, because I was thinking movie instead of TV, But that was pretty well done. They had wanted to use, who was it? Another actress, Betty Davis, I think, but she was allergic to bees. So they used Gloria Swanson instead.
Yeah, pretty remarkable cast and just remarkable production all around. I mean, that was one of Curtis Harrington's first films, if memory serves. It was an interesting experience because all of our interchanges just about with the people, the producers were on the phone, as opposed to, it was a much cheaper budget than a movie, So we did fly out, I think, once, but we mostly did phone conferences about it. And I remember one time they were saying, well, we had a scene where the heroine comes in and the family are waiting on her for dinner. And so the producer on the phone says, and they had two of them, said, let's have them seated. And so she has to walk in and they're already seated having dinner. And I said, no, that would never happen. That would be rude. You wouldn't do that to a guest. And so he says to his other producer, he says, is that rude? I said, yeah, that's rude. So they were still standing waiting when she came down. But I was a little disappointed because I expected the grapevines to show up better than they did. But when they shot it, they were still just these little scrubby things, So it was sort of visually disappointing, too. It sounds like you and Bill didn't necessarily take this whole Hollywood thing very seriously at all. Oh, no. Did you ever even think about, moving out there? Or? Well, we did move out, but that was because we got a job where we had to be there. We did a number of movies, and then we got a call from Procter & Gamble through our agent. In fact, our agent called us up and said, Bill, he said, he was on the phone with him, Bill, is the prestige of doing feature films important to you? And I said, oh, hell no, He said, well, there is this other art form, and it pays very well, but it's very low prestige. And Bill put his hand on the phone and looked at me and said, honey, I think Rick wants us to do porn. But it was soap opera. So we began doing soap opera, but again, we were doing it from New Orleans, and we would fly to New York for a story meeting, and once, maybe every 2 months or a little more frequently. And you project what you're going to do because traditionally soap opera things, you have long story arcs of 6 months or so, and go home and do it. And it was hard work because you're doing, as I said, 52 weeks a year with no vacations and no reruns. But you paid
see, when you do a movie, you're paid well a script, but you do one movie a year, maybe, so you're not getting a lot of money from it. Whereas with the soap opera, you're getting a lot of money because there's just so many scripts. So we did a number of soap opera things, and then we were out of a job, and then our agent set us up to do an interview to do Superior Court, which is a strip show. A strip show is a syndicated show that's on 5 days a week. This has nothing to do with stripping. It was a court show by the people who did People's Court, but they wanted a scripted, and that's unscripted, but they wanted to do a scripted show where you found interesting cases and did them, but you did a different case every day. To do that much story, we sort of had to be there. So we went out for a year and rented and did that for a year. And then at the end of the year, I told Bill that the IRS will let you take off your living expenses living away from home for a year, but not more than that, so we should buy. But we didn't sell our New Orleans house. We just bought intending to, move out there until the job was done and then come back to New Orleans. But we found a wonderful place to buy. It was 26 acres in the Malibu Hills that had been foreclosed because the guy had been killed by a SWAT team because they thought he was a drug dealer. And so it had fallen into bankruptcy. And so we were able to get it for a very good price. So we decided that we liked it so much that we would move out there. And we did Superior Court for a total of 3 years, and then Bill passed away from a heart attack. And there I was with this big property in Malibu. So, but I decided to stay and sell the New Orleans property instead. We wound up living out there for about 21 years before I retired and came back here.
What were you doing in the meantime?
I continued working. I did some soap opera, and then I did, for 11 seasons, I did Real World for MTV, Real World.
Oh, yeah. That was a huge, huge impact on people my generation.
Yeah. Well, I started with the 9th season, and I did from Seattle to Denver. That was very interesting to do because that was my forte, and that I didn't have to write dialogue. I can write dialogue, but Bill said I always wrote dialogue like everyone was a Rice graduate. In Real World, the kids are, at least the way we shot it, we just put cameras on them 24/7 for about 3 or 4 months. It was up to me to find the scenes that made stories. So they had their own voices. I didn't have to do dialogue. I just had to find the story arcs. And that was very interesting. We'd do 39 episodes. So that was Superior Court. We'd do 24 episodes, except sometimes we'd have more material and do it, stretch it out a few more episodes. But you always look for like an episode for each, an arc for each episode, but then you look for arcs for the whole season. Then hopefully someone learns something from being on the show. Because people would say, oh, well, do you mind, don't you miss college teaching? And I said, well, I did feel like I had a good impact because I put in 10 years teaching at a black university, and it really helped get their science program funded better. It's now Xavier University now sends more black kids to medical school than any other university in America, so they have a strong science program. But I said I felt like when I got to doing television that my audience just got bigger. The kids, people that I can affect, particularly with the Real World, because your audience is the younger people, that you can communicate to them in a way that you can't do in a classroom. We had alcoholic stories. We had boyfriend abuse stories. We had anorexic stories. We had even a girl who was a cutter. We didn't know that she was, and when we put her on the cast, but she turned out to be. So you could do some really interesting things, but you weren't making up the stories. You weren't like a grown-up making up teenage stories. They were living their stories, and you were just telling them for them.
That must have been such a change for you, or did the soap operas kind of help you get into that mindset? Yeah, it was actually the producers of the show were Mary Ellis Bunham and John Murray. Couldn't pull up his first name. Mary Ellis had been the producer on our first soap opera, which is how I wound up being the writer, I was co-executive producer, actually was my title, but I was in charge of the story for Real World when I was there because she knew me and knew I could do story.
the story was that MTV wanted to do a soap opera, and they priced it out for them, and they said, well, we can't afford it. They approached John and Mary Ellis, and John's background was in the news, and Mary Ellis was in soap opera. So they priced it out for them. It's like, you got to have writers, you got to have sets, and you got to have editors, and actors, and all this money. And they're pretty expensive to produce. That's why they sort of died off. They're expensive to produce. And so MTV said, well, we can't afford that. So they then thought of the idea of, well, let's try a reality soap opera. And they didn't know if it would work, so they did a pilot show in New York with, I think it was just 6 at that time, cast members. And they said as soon as they put them together, it never went on air, it was just a pilot, but they said as soon as they put them together, it worked. They knew that this was a concept that was going to work. But then they had trouble. You'd have like 3,500 hours of tape by the time you filmed 24/7 for 2 or 3 cameras for that long of 3 months or so. They had trouble mastering the material. And the first 8 seasons, they were going crazy because the story departments, well, like the 8th season, before I took over, the whole entire story department resigned because they were so overworked and so upset. And I came in and was able to organize it in a way that I was in control of the material. We had bloggers, little minions, who are film school graduates, who would sit and look at each tape, and they do a computer entry, a program that for each minute, so editors could go back and find something, And the story department had not been using these tapes, these computer logs, because they said they weren't detailed enough and they weren't fast enough and all. And so I told Mary Ellis, I said, well, we just have to get them done faster and just make them put something down for every minute, and they'll be detailed enough. So I got where I would read the logs, then I would pull out scenes and save them that looked like they might be interesting. And after I'd saved enough scenes in my head, I knew I had a story, that I would lay it out, and I'd have one of my assistant story editors patch together on the computer a rough cut of the show. And that way I was in control of the material, which no one had ever been mentally in control of it before. It was just too much material, And the writers were trying to look at the tapes and remember the tapes and then generate stories from them, and they just couldn't do it. It was just too overwhelming. So they were absolutely amazed, John and Mary Ellis were, that I could come in and organize it like that so that it worked, and we were getting great ratings. And so I did it for 11 seasons until I decided to retire. So it was a lot of fun, actually.
When you're writing, either helping to write a screenplay or writing for soap operas, how are you keeping that kind of stuff organized? I know some people use like 3x5 cards, but when it comes to like a soap opera where you have that whole season-long story arc, how are you kind of mapping that out?
There's sort of 3 levels. There's the meeting level where you meet, usually with the producers, and in Procter & Gamble's case, they had a Procter & Gamble representative there, and then the advertising agency person was there. And you'd pitch a story arc. And I personally, when I did it, I got a roll of like butcher paper, and I would lay it out so that I knew, because I wanted something to happen every week, even though so to most people, the soap operas just nothing ever seems to happen. A lot's happening. You have to keep it. You have to, have your stories going. You have to do, when you're doing an hour show, you have to do pretty much 3 stories a day. You cut from one to the other. And so I would lay it out. But the first story meeting I went to, I pinned this up on the wall, and they were all aghast because, well, you just can't predict it like that, It ties you down too much. You have to be responsive to what's on air. So Gail Kobe, who was a writer development person, found us, told us, she said, I'm just going to tell you, just put the paper away. And she said, you do that at home. Just don't bring it to the meeting. So that's how so you do a projection. It's a long-term story projection. And then you'd come home, and then we would do, and I did, this was my job, to do the breakdowns, which is you lay out for 5 scripts in a row of a week, exactly what the scenes are going to be. And those I did do on 3x5 cards, because then you want to shuffle them. Because you can't, it's like writing a sonnet. You've got so many restrictions. You have actors who have guarantees. Can't put up too many sets. You have a limited number of sets, and you can't change the sets from one day to the next entirely because it costs too much money to put them up and take them down. There are all these restrictions that you have to keep in mind while telling the story. Those I would do on 3x5 cards, and then I would do let's call it a breakdown, and then I give each breakdown to a writer, and Bill would do usually 3 scripts, and we had other writers working for us that they would do another 2 of those, and they would get the scripts back, and then I'd edit them for continuity and send them in. And this was week after week after week after week. It's really exhausting. People don't appreciate it because it's a feminine art form. It's like anything that women are attached to, like nursing and teaching or whatever, or soap opera, because it's mostly feminine. It gets degraded. But for the actor, think how hard it is for an actor to be given an hour script in which they have, a huge number of lines, and they get it and they have to master it, they have to block it, and they have to tape it all in one day. It's just incredible that they can do it.
No, I always admire the amount of skill that it takes for the people behind the scenes and the people in front of the camera to be able to just get that going and keep that momentum up just day after day.
Yeah, and we had the director is doing live editing on 3 cameras. He's cutting the cameras. You don't go back and edit the soap opera. You edit it online like that as you're doing it. So it was like watching. You see it in sports. When you're doing a live sports show, you're cutting from camera to camera. But mostly you don't do that with drama. Mostly you film the darn stuff and then edit it. But this was totally different way of doing it. And then when you got into reality television, there's a totally different way of doing it because you have all this footage and no script at all. So you have to impose the script on the footage, as it were.
Can you tell me about the New Orleans mysteries? When did those come about?
Bill was a writer, and he had always had modest success in publishing his books until he wrote one called Shad, which is absolutely a wonderful book. But it was huge. It was a strange mixture of, it was almost comedic. The structure is Don Giovanni. And anyway, he did this wonderful manuscript, and his editor was so excited about it. I mean, his agent was so excited about it that she thought she'd have an auction on it. Well, put it out for auction, and no one was interested in it. And he just could not sell it. And then finally, a small publishing house bought it, printed it, and then they went bankrupt, so it sat in a warehouse and never really got distributed. I mean, it was just terrible. So Bill was so disappointed with this book that he said, well, Dan, I'm just going to write something that's, this popular fiction or whatever. So he had always had in mind a scene where a hero walks in the bar and everyone in the bar is dead. And so I said, well, let me think about it. So I come up with a plot, and we did the plot and send it in. And his agent immediately gets it not only published in America, but she took it to the Berlin Film Festival and sold it internationally. We have Japanese editions and Swedish editions. So it's not that it ever became like a monster success, but it was a modest success, So we did... we were working on the 4th of that when Bill passed away with his heart attack. So I finished the 4th, and then I did the 5th and the 6th after that. But they were just done in between times when we would, we'd be between movies or soap operas, because even soap operas, we changed. We didn't voluntarily necessarily, but we did voluntarily. We left Search for Tomorrow voluntarily to start our own show, Texas. But then Fred Silverman, after it, wasn't happy with the ratings on Texas, so he fired us. Only time in my life I was ever fired. That was so upsetting to me 2 years to get over it. And then, but generally we would do a soap opera for a period of time, maybe a year or two, and that would be it, because it's just such hard work. You just sort of get tired of it. So in between jobs was when we were doing the mystery series. They were just something we're having fun with. It's fun to do it. Because to me, Bill said he would never write a book he knew the end of. But I'm the other way around. When I do a mystery story, I have to plot it all the way through so that you can appropriately, get you from A to Z, as it were. But he was fine with following my outlines. That wasn't how he wrote his serious books. He discovered his books as he wrote them.
So what was that relationship like when you guys were writing? I mean, was he the one sitting behind the typewriter and you're giving the ideas, or are you switching off? I mean, how did that go?
No, the idea part, we would usually go out to dinner. Bill loved a local steak restaurant called Charlie's and have a bottle of old Policelli, which is a cheap red wine, and then throw around ideas, because if you're trying to create something, don't self-censor. It's like, what if, even if it's stupid, what if? And then I would come home, because I can remember all these what ifs in my head, and do some sort of story outline, which we would discuss, and then I would firm up the detailed outline of the script or whatever. And then generally Bill would do the dialogue of the script, and he was wonderful at creating character through dialogue. He could do wonderful voices for people. We each sort of played to our own strengths. Mine was the storytelling, and his was the writing.
Was it intimidating when you came to the 5th book and had to do it on your own?
No, I picked up his style because he had already set a style. Well, I had to finish the 4th, actually. But when I did the 5th, a friend of mine said, I would never have thought a woman read that book. I said, well, I picked up Bill's style. That was my style, per se. So, but no, it wasn't intimidating. I'd done it too long to be intimidated by it.
Are you still writing?
Not too much. I did a sort of a biography that I've never published, but I'm helping friends. A friend of mine, Jody Bell Sinclair, she was a TV reporter who married a guy who was in Angola. He had been on death row, but got his sentence commuted to life. And he spent the next 25 years trying to get him out of prison. So she was doing her biography, and I was helping her edit it recently, because she's a good writer, but she had written for TV, so she wrote dynamically, but her organization was pretty weak because she wasn't used to doing any long form stuff, So I helped her by editing her book for her. So that's sort of fun. And my son-in-law is also doing his memoirs. He was a hippie. He went to Vietnam twice, had 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, and then came back the hippie president of the student body at LSU. So back in the 70s. So that was, he had a very, very interesting life, became a public defender. I enjoy helping people do their lives, because people have such stories, and generally you don't get to know people. You have cocktail conversations about what movie you've seen and what restaurants you've been to. But when people have really interesting stories when they get down to it.
Where's the best place for people to pick up your books and Bill's books?
I have a website, jcorrington.com, that lists our mystery stories, and then separately lists Bill's serious work. And I was able to bring all of his older books back into print that way. Amazon has a side branch, CreateSpace, and they if you send them a digital manuscript, they quote publish it, and that they offer it through Amazon, and they don't print them until it's ordered. So the price is really quite cheap. So all of his books are in print, and I also did all of his collected poetry, and the collected short stories, and then another young man did a collection of his essays recently. So all of his work is now back available in print, which is good.
Well, I'd love to read your bio if you ever consider putting that out too.
Oh, well, that was just for the family. I haven't actually published it yet. I gave it to my son, who helped me put the ones on Amazon, and he's been sitting on it for years, so I think he's waiting for me to die to publish it. Can hand it out at the funeral.
Joyce, thank you so much for your time. This has been fantastic.
Oh, good. Well, and if I can help you any way further, let me know, because I'm retired, so I'm really I work with the League of Women Voters. I was the state president for 2 years, but I'm not the president anymore, so I'm not overly occupied with anything to do. So I'd be happy to help you if anything comes up.
I'm not infected. I'm not infected. Please.
Nothing happened the way it was supposed to happen. 6 billion people on Earth when the infection hit. I'm a survivor living in New York City. I will be at the South Street Seaport every day at midday when the sun is highest in the sky. Now just sleep. Eat your vegetables. Don't just push them around. Eat them. I'm not playing. Morning, Hank. Midway through the G's. God didn't do this. We did.
All right, we're back and we're talking about the Omega Man, and we're going to have to talk about I Am Legend, guys. I'm sorry.
Oh,
but
gosh. All right.
I Am Legend comes out in 2007, and this is one of those projects that was kicking around since the mid-90s. There were 2 scripts that were floating around, one by John Logan, one by Mark Protosevich, and those scripts, wow, they are fantastic. I have to say both of those individually, and I'm very curious as far as the evolution of these scripts, because Protosevich in 96, he writes a script and he takes the creatures away from being the cultish family that we've seen, away from being kind of more the shambling zombies, and puts them more into more of what we're going to kind of see in I Am Legend, more of the, really hyper killer kind of creatures, more like those 28 Days Later type of zombies that we're going to see. And he calls them hemocytes. And then it's interesting because in Logan's script that has a date of, I want to say 97, he also refers to the creatures as hemocytes. So I don't know if it is one of those things where 2 writers got the same assignment and they kind of went from there, or if it was Protosevich to Logan back to Protosevich, or how that worked. And spoiler alert, I will hopefully be talking to Protosevich, and we'll have an interview in here that I have yet to record, so I'm very curious if he'll be able to shed any light on that. But again, we take these same blocks that we've seen in these other movies and we are rearranging them. So do we have a dog? Do we have the mystery of what happened to his family? Do we have Cortman in here? What are these creatures like? And so we mix and match those kind of things through the 2 scripts. And again, both of these are fantastic. Really enjoyed them. And then the project goes into turnaround. I think at one point it was supposed to be Ridley Scott directing with possibly Arnold Schwarzenegger as Neville.
That would have been fan. Can you imagine Neville going around with staking vampires going, I'm dead serious. You got the point.
It would have been really good. It's interesting, too, because when we talked on this show about 12 Monkeys, 12 Monkeys was one of the movies that came out in the wake of the Ebola explosion over in Africa. And there was the article, The Hot Zone, and then there's the book of The Hot Zone. I think the book of The Hot Zone came out in 1984, and then there was a real rush. Again, Ridley Scott was slated to direct the movie version of The Hot Zone, which only now is available, I think, as a miniseries. I can't remember what channel or streaming platform that's available on, but again, maybe kind of too little too late, who knows? But yeah, so we had all of these disease movies coming out or being informed by this stuff, and this would have been yet another entry in that, but then it gets delayed for almost 10 years or over 10 years. And then we finally get what we ended up getting. I even read a script from 2005, which had Akiva Goldsman's name on it. And I'm not a big fan of Goldsman, but even that script from December 8th, 2005 is better than what we ended up getting. I don't know who to lay the blame for, whose feet I should lay this blame for, because the I Am Legend 2007 film, I am not a big fan of this film.
I went and watched it for the first time for the show, and I think my review on Letterboxd was the things I do for the projection booth. But to be honest with you, I mean, yeah, okay, sure. I think we agree it's not a great film, but it was nowhere near the disaster that I was fearing it was going to be. But I think most of my problems with it were I guess more visual, the whole notion. I'm not a big fan of CGI-laden, big blockbuster type films. The whole notion of the creatures in I Am Legend, they'd mutated so much. They were not the least bit human. They roared with the strength of 1,000 amplifiers. It just, none of that made any sense to me. For whatever other problems the earlier films had with the characterization of Robert Neville, you felt some level of sympathy for them. I mean, you know, maybe more with Vincent Price and Charlton Heston, but you felt something for them. And really, Will Smith's character in this, you see him lose his wife and daughter, and you're supposed to feel something bad for him. And I'm sorry to sound like an asshole, but I never do. And that's a problem. I'm not sure if that's a problem with the script or it's a problem with the direction. Yeah, I just feel nothing for him. And it's shot to me competently, but I never feel involved in the story. And it's a real shame because, I love everything else related to the stories of Robert Neville, the book and the other two films.
I share your complete lack of empathy with Will Smith in this role. I just felt nothing. In fact, it really annoyed me. And I was thinking as I was watching I Am Legend, the 2007 film, who would I want to hang out with more? Charlton in his apartment with the crushed velvet and the dinner and the music and the weird swinger two-way screen, or clean living, all-round good guy, Bob Marley listening, Neville in the 2000. I know I'd be with Chuck. It'd be much more entertaining. We could play chess. We could hang out. We could talk about things. We could go cruising. He's such a boring character, and there's no – I suppose there's a sense of edge to him, to Will Smith's performance, but there's something missing at the core of this film. There's no – it's just not dramatic. There's nothing driving it. The one thing I did like, I had seen I Am Legend a long time ago when it first came out, I think, because I thought, oh, great, a remake of the Omega Man or a remake of the I Am Legend book. This will be great. Of course, I was very disappointed, and much like you, Maurice, I sacrificed 2 hours of my life for Mike in the projection booth that I will never get back, watching I Am Legend again for this podcast. I did quite like the depiction of New York, CGI laden as it is. I thought that was quite interesting. The fact that he basically shoots golf balls off that massive mothballed bomber. I thought that was quite interesting. All these huge battleships sort of rotting in the harbour. The fact that New York is full of wild animals, including mountain lions. I quite like that. But yeah, there's very little I liked in this film, and like you, I just felt no empathy for Will Smith's character.
It's tough when you feel more empathy for the dog than you do for Will Smith. And when the dog dies in the movie's pretty much over for me. I don't care about anything after that.
And there's one moment in it that just seems to me to be so completely illogical. We see early on him going into a video library and he's talking to the dummies, pretty much like Charlton Heston is talking to himself, and maybe it keeps him with some level of sanity. But there's that moment where he sees a dummy at the end of a street. Now, he's previously gone and set up traps to capture these creatures, hemocytes, whatever you want to call them. And they do the same to capture him. And these creatures, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed to me that all they are noise and violence and slobbering, and they have no level of intelligence. At least there's been no indication to that point. But how does a creature that really just lives to eat and to kill set up a sophisticated trap like that? It just seemed like one glaring big logical fallacy in the film. I mean, I can forgive logical problems with films, but in a film where you don't feel anything for the main character and there are holes in the plot, then yeah, it's not doing a great job.
Well, that's the thing that they don't manage to bring out in this film, is that there is a relationship between the woman creature that he ends up taking and the male creature that, when he comes out into the sun and is burning himself and screaming at Neville, then it becomes a revenge story from his point of view. And he's the guy who sets up the trap and does all of these things. He basically sets up the exact same trap that we see Will Smith setting up. But we don't necessarily get that, and Smith is too dumb to realize that there is a relationship there, and he says in his journal, like, oh yeah, there was a weird thing that happened. This creature came out in the sunlight and was burning himself. Wow, that's kind of weird. And he never puts two and two together. And it's just like, so he thinks of these things as completely mindless and only wants to use them for their blood and to try to find a cure. Again, in the 2005 script, in that one, he's really trying to find a cure because his wife and daughter have turned and are basically serving the leader of the hemocytes, and he abuses them like a bad stepfather kind of a creature. And so he's like, okay, I want to get them and I want to save them and do this kind of stuff. I'll figure out what's going on. And he goes through all these test subjects, and we do get a shot in I Am Legend 2007 of all of the previous subjects that he has worked on. And so again, kind of saying like, oh yeah, he is the knight. He goes through and murders all of these creatures, and he's the stuff of their nightmares or daymares, I suppose. But again, it's just so like thrown away. There's so many moments in this 2007 movie that we get through just little flashes of like the cover of Time magazine that's on his refrigerator, or a headline inside of a place that he happens to go into. It's just really poor storytelling.
To harken back to the original themes in the book, there is that sense that the hemocytes are evolving into. I mean, as you say, I mean, he's not. There's no sense. He's not getting that. He's not realizing that there is a sense that they are evolving into something else, and they actually have some sort of community, and that they're evolving into something else. But yes, it's a fairly minor highlight in an otherwise very lackluster script, I think. And I'll just go back to how uninspiring Will Smith is. I quite like Will Smith, some of his stuff he's done, but his all-round clean American good guy image in this film is sort of boring. And can we just say about the very end when who is it? Alicia Braga and Charlie Tahan, who play Anna and Ethan, who are the woman and the young boy, who are sort of them, stumble into Neville's orbit and then escape when he's a flat sort of gets attacked by the hemocytes, and they escape with, I think, some serum that Neville's made. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then they go on this trip, and then they seem to cross over into The Handmaid's Tale, and end up in this weird sort of rural Christian sort of walled, gated community. It looks like. Welcome to the future of America. Yeah.
Well, that's in one version of the ending. And the other version of the ending is we have this very heavy-handed butterfly imagery that goes throughout this whole thing. We have his daughter in the back seat saying, "Dad, look, a butterfly." And she does that again when he puts her on the helicopter and she's doing this thing with her hands like, "Look, a butterfly." And then when he and Sam, the dog, are going through the cornfield, we get a shot of a CGI butterfly that's flying around. And I know somebody's going to correct me and tell me all about the insect wrangling that happened on this movie. That seems to be my thing. If I call something CGI, somebody has to prove me wrong that it wasn't a CGI thing. But anyway, so yeah, at the end, the head hemocyte, they are inside of the that little room with the glass, which it seems to be unbreakable glass. Good thing that he put that in there. And the hemocyte is just pounding against the glass so much that it starts to shatter, and it shatters into an image of a butterfly. And then he looks down at the woman that he's got, and she's got a butterfly tattoo. And he's like, "Oh, okay, I understand." He wheels the body out of that containment unit. The main hemocyte comes up to him and is sniffing him and all this kind of stuff. And he takes the body and goes away. And Neville basically apologizes when he sees all of those pictures of the other people that this guy probably knew that Neville has kidnapped. And then the three of them drive off, and we still get the Anna voiceover, but it's a little bit different, and we don't get that Handmaid's Tale colony that we see. We basically get her saying,
"My name is Anna Montes. There are other survivors. I'm traveling with Dr. Robert Neville and a boy named Ethan. We're heading north on Route 17 to Bethel, Vermont. Keep your radio on. Listen for our broadcasts. You are not alone. There is hope. Keep listening. You are not alone."
The happy ending versus the not happy ending, and the butterfly imagery and all this, it was just a little heavy-handed with that. I don't understand why Neville is broadcasting, "Come to me, I have food, I have shelter," all this stuff. When we see all of the bridges being destroyed for getting into New York, we see the tunnel, we hear about the tunnels getting blocked. Why is he broadcasting this thing and saying, "Come on over to Manhattan"? This basically impenetrable island at this point.
Swim the Hudson? I don't know.
Sure. Find a fucking boat and come on over to me. And then you and I, we can watch Shrek together, and I'll repeat all of the lines.
I know, it really is. Please, put me in Neville's flat. In 92. I'll have.
Would you rather see Woodstock or Shrek 1,000 times?
I would happily cook dinner for Charlton Heston as he comes home from mutant hunting every day. "How was your day, Chuck?" "Yeah, good." "Move."
He wouldn't tell you that he was saving that bacon, huh?
That's right. You're definitely right that given that the only aspect of I Am Legend, the only scene I felt genuine suspense for was when the dog gets lost in that building. And you think, "Well, get the dog out, get the dog out, get the dog out." The dog is actually the main character, really, in some respects of I Am Legend. It's that lackluster.
But that's a Hollywood trope, isn't it? You want to get that factor, put a dog in.
Yeah, it would have been so much better with Arnold Schwarzenegger on a huge Harley Davidson tooling round. Oh yeah, fantastic.
The thing that I really appreciated about I Am Legend 2007 was just the amazing job that Emma Thompson, one of the most amazing actresses of our time, that she just gives such a terrific performance for all of about 10 seconds, and then we never see her again.
She's as Dr. Crip.
And so she's the one who fucks the world, and then it's up to the man to unfuck the world and come up with the serum, which, again, I find a little troubling in this movie.
The plague has been caused by Emma Thompson, the doctor's one of her cures, isn't it? Technophobia again.
So yeah, the less said about I Am Legend 2007, I think the better.
I'm struggling. I'm looking at my half a page of notes on it, and I just can't. I can't really dredge up anything. I feel like that scene in Ed Wood where they're looking at the review of the film. The costumes, yes, the costumes were very realistic.
Yeah, you can't say that much about the CG. Oh my God,
That's right.
As soon as we see those shitty CG deer, Oh my God, that was just nasty. And it's like, okay, are you trying to prepare us for the bad CG of the vampires later on? Because they look absolutely terrible. They are some of the worst CG creatures I've seen in a long time.
Doing my Ed Wood thing here, it's nowhere near as bad as the CG at the end of Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, or whatever that last one was called. That was, I mean, I haven't seen a ton of films with that original incarnation of CGI or whatever it was, but that was, for me, the shittiest thing I think I've ever seen. Oh, and the CG.
Brought to you by the same guy who brought you fucking Jurassic Park 97? I mean, what the fuck, man? How can you go from one to... sorry, I'm going to get off that soapbox.
One other thing I think that possibly is worth sort of mentioning about this film, because we were talking before in the earlier films about the religious iconography, and they thought, oh, hang on, there's religious iconography in the previous versions of the film and the book. I guess we have to include a little bit of that here. So this is another film about science versus faith. And, you know, he's like a dead man, but what happens, the light shines almost like Jake seeing the light in the Blues Brothers over the James Brown church. And he's rescued by Anna, and she has this cross dangling in her car. And, I mean, I don't think that they make a big thing. He doesn't die in a cross-like pose like Chuck and Vincent do, but they definitely... It seemed to me like it was something that they just had to tick off a checklist. Oh, yeah, we better include that in because it was in the other films.
I think the funniest thing for me was just how they wanted to go for... like the elbow nudge kind of thing when Smith is walking around New York City. In the background on one of the marquees, because he's in Times Square, is a big poster for Batman versus Superman, which at the time that this was made seemed like it was never going to happen. And at one point, Akiva Goldsman, that was his project. Like, he rewrote that script for one of the last incarnations. Again, a terrible rewrite that he ends up doing. That's why I don't trust Akiva Goldsman, is that it seems like whenever he comes in and does one of the final rewrites on a project, it ends up shitty. But even his shitty rewrite of this in 2005 was better than what we ended up with in 2007. So again, I don't know if this is the director, if this is another producer thing, what's going on, but why was this movie so bad?
It's an interesting insight into Hollywood, though. I mean, what I don't have the insight, but I mean, I'm asking about an insight into Hollywood, the inertia that pushes these films on. A film that's clearly not really speaking to, as you say, it could have been speaking to that whole trope about, you know, unleashed contagions in the 90s that happened, but it's not. It's not feeding into any sort of greater political commentary like in its own ham-fisted way the Omega Man is. It doesn't speak to any sort of themes of the Cold War or religion like the Last Man on Earth is. It's a terrible script. It's a terrible film. It doesn't really work. Why didn't someone say, whoa, stop, no, come on, we can pull back on this. We don't have to do this. But what, does the machine just get going and it just basically has to keep getting made, or is someone pushing it, or was it a passion project on the part of Will Smith? What's behind it? Why didn't someone just call time on this?
Yeah, they should have pulled the plug. The patient is dead, doctor.
I'm convinced that at some stage, someone with a better sense of what would have made a good script and realizing that this wasn't, is going to pitch it to HBO or to Netflix, and it's going to be an 8-part miniseries or something like that, which I think if done right would actually work really well. I think it's a sort of story that lends itself to multiple parts, and feasibly, if you're doing it in that way, we might even be able to afford the luxury of an episode or two bringing it back to the book where, you know, Robert Neville is going through all these experiments to work out what's the science behind what makes these vampires tick. So, yeah, if there's anyone out there listening to the show that's saying, you know, I was just thinking about pitching this to Netflix, do it.
Or are they pitching the 1971 version, in which case season 2 could be about Lisa and Dutch and the kids and what happens to them afterwards, and they basically go to the countryside and there's a bizarre hillbilly clan of, albino mutants.
Oh, isn't that The Hills Have Eyes?
Hey, this writes itself.
Anyone out there listening? We're available to write your script for you.
All right, we're going to take another break and play an interview with the screenwriter for I Am Legend, the original screenwriter for I Am Legend, Mr. Mark Protosevich. I am very curious how you decided to get into the screenwriting business.
When I was young, the first thing I thought I would do as a career was be an actor. And I'm talking about from when I was maybe about 10 years old. And that lasted all the way up until maybe I was about 15 or so. And I really loved theater and I really loved acting. And I was told actually I was pretty good at it. But the idea of auditioning live in front of people for the rest of my life was not very appealing. And also, I was always drawing. I was always an artist. And so the next thing, sort of when I was a teenager, the next thing I thought I would do would be an illustrator or a comic book artist. And that was really my focus through most of high school. That's what I thought I was going to do, and I thought I would go to an art school, try to have a job in commercial art. Specific, I was a huge comic book and science fiction and fantasy fan, and so, that was going to be the type of work that I wanted to do. In all honesty, I think my skill set wasn't where it probably needed to be. I didn't pursue that path. If I probably went to art school, I might have honed those skills and probably might have gotten there. But in my junior year of high school, my high school offered one film studies class. It was film analysis. The teacher would show us films and talk about films. And the other part of it was he offered the opportunity to make films. And so I started making Super 8 movies. And in high school, when I was about 16, 17, and I loved it. It was just really something that I gravitated towards and found very fulfilling. So film became my focus, and I was always a movie fan. I was obsessed with movies and would watch stuff on TV and go to the movies as much as possible to see in theaters. I was seeing everything I could, and I loved the whole movie experience. So it was during that time I thought film might be something I would want to pursue. And so I went to film school. I went to Columbia College in Chicago and studied film after graduating high school. And in film school, I realized what I was most attracted to was screenwriting. I did make short films, and I did enjoy directing, especially working with actors, but I wasn't an obsessive shooter. I mean, I knew a lot of people in film school who later went on to be cinematographers and other people who were editors, but they were doing that. They wanted to do that. I really loved the writing process. And the thing is, I had always been a writer. I realized that was the other thing, is that ever since I was fourth grade and I was obsessed with vampires, and I carried around a little spiral notebook writing my own vampire stories. So the writing aspect was always with me, and I wrote for my high school newspaper, so I was always writing. So, but when I was in film school, it was very clear to me that was the one area of the filmmaking process that I was most attracted to, and that's what and I was good at it. In terms of teacher feedback from my teachers, the other thing too that I was actually good at was I focused a lot also on film history and criticism, and I was obsessed with watching movies and foreign films and classic films and silent films, and I even at one point, when I graduated film school, I thought about getting a master's degree, in film history or in film studies, and probably writing books about movies or teaching, that type of thing. And I did teach for a while after college. I taught some basic film production courses. At a certain point, after 4 years of being in Chicago, or 4 years after 4 years after college and trying to pursue a career sort of in the local film industry, I realized what I needed to do was move to LA. And so that's what I did.
So what year was that you moved to LA?
I was 25 years old, and I was born in 1961, so that makes it 1986.
What did you do when you got out there?
I went out with the intention of becoming a screenwriter. That was my goal. And I had spent about a year or 6 months in Chicago, 6 months or so in Chicago, working on a script that I thought could be my calling card. I had written something that I thought, this is a good script. I thought it was commercial at the time. It was very influenced by, I would call it a very Sam Peckinpah inspired script, sort of more, not a Western, but more of a modern, probably more akin to something like Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, or also there's a movie I love called Rolling Thunder. It was similar to that. So it was sort of in that kind of genre. And this was at a time where those movies still had a possibility of being made. And so I had broken up with a girlfriend that I was living with in Chicago and sold almost everything I had, sold most of my comic book collection, and drove out to LA in my beat to crap Ford Escort with about $5,000 in my pocket. Drove to LA and had a place to stay with a couple of friends. A friend of mine who was an editor, and actually who has proven to have quite a career as an editor. His name's Peter Teschner, but Peter was a good friend of mine from Chicago, and he and his wife Gloria put me up, and I was supposed to stay at their place probably for a couple of weeks, and I think I ended up staying about 3 months. They were very kind to me until I could get my, feet on the ground, because I didn't have a job lined up. I didn't have any prospects really. I just sort of thought I would, go out and not establish myself as a writer. I knew I didn't have that much money or that kind of thing, and I didn't want to take a job, doing something else, like working as like actors who work as waiters or whatever. I didn't want to do that and then spend time writing. I wanted some type of job and needed some type of job. I couldn't afford to otherwise. So I just started, I signed up with a temp agency and would do, office jobs here and there. I could type fairly well, not great, but it would at least get me in the door. And so I started doing a lot of office jobs, and I sent out a lot of resumes and answering ads in the Hollywood Reporter and Variety. And sort of my first real inroad came, I answered an ad in one of the trades, it was either Variety or the Hollywood Reporter, for a job as a receptionist at a production company. And at the time, it was a production company owned by Michael Douglas and Michael Phillips, the actor Michael Douglas and the producer Michael Phillips, who produced Taxi Driver and The Sting. And they had their own production company, and I ended up getting the receptionist job. The people at that office were terrific. And one thing that I've found when I moved to LA is that people were really supportive. If you're really passionate about what you're doing and you're eager to prove yourself and you want to do things, I really find people want to help you. Or at least that was my experience. And so they were great, and they had an in-house reader, a story analyst, and she would give me a lot of her extra work, or they would give me the extra, because I had thought that was a good job for me. That would be the perfect job for me. In Hollywood, would be a reader, would be the story analyst, and so I started doing that on the side at the production company, aside from writing letters and answering the phones and all that kind of stuff. And I got good at it, so I thought I had a really nice, secure ground floor position in the industry. And then that Michael Douglas and Michael Phillips decided to end their partnership and were going to go their separate ways and dissolve the company. But the people who I worked for, the development executives there, they were very supportive of me, and they helped they kept their ears open for other jobs I might have, and I ended up getting a job after that with Scott Rudin, the producer Scott Rudin. The first year he was a producer. He had been an executive at Fox and was president of production at Fox, if I remember correctly, and was starting out on his own as a producer. And I got an interview with Scott and showed him some of my story work in terms of you write coverage as a reader. You know, you do a log, you do a short synopsis of the piece, of the script or the book, and then you write a longer description. And so I showed Scott a lot of that stuff, and I had a meeting with him, and I ended up working for Scott for over a year. That first year he was a producer, and I would say that I learned more about screenwriting and the film industry and how movies actually get made and what a script needs to achieve. I learned more in that first year, in that 1 year with Scott, than in 4 years of film school.
Do you remember any of the people that you were back then? Anybody that went on to bigger and better things?
I remember vividly there were 3 writers that I remember reading at that time where I read their scripts and I was like, oh my God, this is screenwriting. This is real. This is what it's all about. And it was Scott Frank, Eric Roth, and Steve Zalian. And they're 3 of the best working writers right now and have been for many decades. And there's a reason why for that. I actually remember feeling that, and I haven't read it in a long time, and there have been other scripts, but I remember reading Steve Zalian's original script for the movie Awakenings. I think it's a very flawed film and is problematic. I especially feel that way because I read his script, and it really is just one of the greatest scripts I've ever read, maybe the best script I've ever read. And I think you can find it online. Unfortunately, one of many occasions where, in my experience, where not only in stuff that I've seen or work of my own, where at least one version of the actual script, like whether it's the first draft or a different draft or somewhere along the lines, that the script is so much better than the movie, which is the frustrating thing of any screenwriter, I feel. That's the hardest thing.
So while you're working with the Michaels and then working with Scott, are you also writing your own stuff at the same time?
Yeah, exactly. I was whatever job I had. I actually eventually, I was offered a creative executive job. I was offered jobs in development, and I had those jobs for about, I must have done that kind of work for about 7 years. And I was good at it. I was what was known as a story guy. I would work with the writers, and I would, look for original material, and I would do story notes and things like that. And so I did that, probably for about 7-8 years. But I was always writing. I wrote one script every year in all of that time, no matter what kind of job I had. I mean, and some of those jobs were very demanding in terms of your time, but this is what I would get up an hour earlier every day than I had to and write for an hour before I had to go to my job. Little by little, I would get a script. It would take me longer because I was only writing a little bit at a time, but eventually I had scripts. And even the first script that I came out to LA with, there were some nibbles of interest in that. And then over the years, there were some interest in other scripts I had written. Even I was working at Orion at one time, and I was the director of development there. This was during the time of when Dances with Wolves and Silence of the Lambs came out. So it was a really wonderful place to be, and a really great group of people, and then ultimately it went bankrupt. But it was a really good time, and while I was there, I had written a script, and everybody at Orion, even the president of production, Mark Platt, now a very successful producer, of course, everybody was supportive, and they would try to get my script to agents or to producers, and there were always little nibbles. But it's a long process. I mean, I wrote probably 8 to 10 scripts, feature scripts, over those years before I finally sold my first one and got an agent.
And which one was that?
That was The Cell. And that became my calling card. Whenever there's a sale, people will want to read the script, the producers, studio executives, they'll want to read it as a writing sample. So my agent sent out my script for the cell as my writing sample. And then what happens is people want, if they like it, if executives or producers respond to the material or like your writing, they want to sit down and meet with you and offer you projects. And I had written one project for MGM, and then I had written a project for Fox 2000, which was a company at the time. And then I got a call to meet with Lorenzo de Bonaventura at Warner Brothers. Lorenzo at that time was a VP, about to become the president of the studio, and later, of course, would become a producer. So I went into a meeting at Warner Brothers with Lorenzo, and he said, I want to talk to you about 3 projects. The first is I Am Legend. And I said, we don't have to talk about the other 2. I was flabbergasted because I was a huge fan of the Matheson book. My introduction to the material, though, was The Omega Man, which I saw in a drive-in theater in Springfield, Illinois, when it was first released. Later on, when I was in film school and immersing myself more, I think it was in film school. When I was in college, I read the Matheson book and then tracked down the Vincent Price film. I knew the material and I knew Matheson and loved Matheson. And so when Lorenzo said that they were thinking of doing a new version of the Omega Man, or, calling it I Am Legend, utilizing stuff from the book too. They didn't know really what they wanted. They just wanted to do I Am Legend. And I was just flabbergasted. I mean, it was like, at the beginning of my career, and you're being offered a dream project, essentially. That night, I went home and wrote out, like in a fever dream, like a 12-page treatment of what I thought the movie could be, and then went back to Warner Brothers in a couple of days and met with Lorenzo and the producer of the project at the time, Neil Moritz, and pitched to them my whole take on the movie, and I got the job. There are certain times that are wonderful for any creative person when the whole thing just kind of comes to you, where it's not work. It's just the ideas are just flowing and forming. And I always say the best scripts I've ever written is when the movie exists in my head. It's like somehow the entire film, from beginning to end, exists in my head. And when I'm writing, all I'm really doing is describing what I'm seeing in my head. And it just flows. It's just so easygoing. And I Am Legend was one of those. And so I wrote that first draft in 1996.
The first draft that I see is November 6, 1996.
Yeah, that was it. So yeah, I wrote the first draft of I Am Legend in 96. That script really got a lot of attention and really became my calling card more than the cell. I remember my agent at the time telling me, Mark, every year there is one script that every executive, agent, and producer in the business reads. And that year it was I Am Legend. So that really solidified me as a writer in the eyes of the industry. And in some ways within the industry, it's probably the script that I'm best known for. My first script. And that script's available online, and I'll have people, like I'll be at the airport and getting a rental car, and I'll have some guy say to me, "You're Mark Protosevich? I read your I Am Legend, your original I Am Legend script. That's a great script." And so it's got that. It has a bit of a cult following. that very first draft. And I still love that draft. I'm really proud of that draft. And it opened a lot of doors for me because, one thing that happens is it's one thing to sell a spec script. It's another thing to do well on an assignment. And, it's sort of like the industry is kind of testing you as to how you can do. If we give you a project, if we give you an opportunity, and if you show them that you can write something really good based on something they're giving you, that's just what they're looking for. I've often thought that really there are screenwriters can take really one of two paths, although there are more variations now, but at least at that time, either you were going to try to do your own material. You were going to just write original material and either do it independently or just write original specs, that type of thing, and sell those when there was a spec market. But so you would write originals, or which you could always write originals, but some people would choose to do just one, or you would put yourself out there as sort of a writer not as a sort of, but as a writer for hire, where you're going to the various studios or production companies and saying, I'd like to know what you're thinking of doing. Or if you have a pitch, you can go and pitch ideas to them, but you're working within the system. I've always compared screenwriting to, in a lot of ways, it's similar to being an architect. You can design your own buildings, but you need a system in place and financing and backers to build that building or build that house. And so most of the time you're doing work for hire. You're bringing your personality and your style to it, but you have to work with people. You have to work with the client. That has its own challenges and its own ups and downs, and can be a great thing or can be a problematic thing. But I Am Legend was the script that sort of allowed me to have a career that is still going on today.
So who's your client on that? Is that Bonaventura?
It's Warner Brothers. So the client in that regard is Warner Brothers, and the executives would change over the years on it too. Because the other thing that's interesting about I Am Legend is that I began working on that in '96, and my last draft that I worked on for Warner Brothers was 2003. So I was involved with that project at 4 or 5 different times over a period of 8 years. When it first sold, within a few months, they put Arnold Schwarzenegger on it. Arnold Schwarzenegger was going to star. And this was coming on the heels, I think, he was at the top of the game right then. So it was a big thing. And then Ridley Scott was going to be the director. So it was going to be Ridley Scott and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And they hired a production designer, Arthur Max, who's worked with Ridley for years, was working on it. I saw his storyboards not his storyboards, but a lot of his sketches, his introductory sketches, and they were doing location scouting, and the movie was going to get made. And then Warner Brothers had a couple of big films really underperform. One of which was The Postman. If I remember correctly, there was something else. And so they suddenly were being very budget conscious, and Ridley's budget for I Am Legend was incredibly high. And so there were big problems there, and the movie fell apart. Over the course of the next 8 years, various directors came in, and it was always active. It was always something people talked about. And then in 2003, Will Smith said that he wanted to do it. And so I met with him and worked with him on retooling the script, incorporating a lot of his ideas about the character and that sort of thing. And Michael Bay was going to be the director. Everything was proceeding forward. And then Will and Michael had a bit of a falling out, or there was something going on with them. And then 28 Days Later came out around the same time. And Warner Brothers, it was like, oh, we can't go forward with ours right now because this movie's out there and getting a lot of attention and it'd be way too similar. So they decide to wait. And then it wasn't until years later that Francis Lawrence came on and Will went back to it, and that's the movie that got made. But the other factor in there was that Akiva Goldsman was one of the producers as well, and Akiva wanted to do a rewrite. And so after being, involved with this project for 8 years, when it finally goes to being made, I'm off it. That type of thing happens all the time, and it's very frustrating. And I remember getting a phone call from the executive at Warner Brothers saying, I Am Legend's finally going to get made. It's almost greenlit, or we want to really move forward. Everyone's excited about it. Will's on board. Francis Lawrence is going to direct, and Will Smith's production company and Akiva's production company are going to be the ones who actually do the producing. But Akiva's got all these great ideas about how to rethink the script. And they pitched to me what he's thinking, and I don't agree with any of it. But they were saying to me, we want you to do it. We want you to be the writer, but we want you to incorporate these new ideas. And I just didn't respond to the material at all. And I said, can we talk about this? And the next thing I know, I get a call and I'm saying, oh, Akiva wants to do the rewrite himself. That's how it proceeds. And that draft of the script was what I was told it was going to be. It changed the whole concept of the movie. It was all the infected people, all the infected creatures were on the island of Manhattan. It wasn't widespread. It wasn't worldwide. They're all on the island of Manhattan, and all the bridges and access to Manhattan have been destroyed. And Will Smith's the only actual healthy human on Manhattan. He's there because his wife and daughter are there, and he's working to find a cure there. But the rest of the country's fine, and the threat is that these creatures might get off the island. It just didn't make sense to me. It was because also it just took away the whole Last Man on Earth concept. And when the movie went into production, I was 100% convinced that was the script that they were going to shoot, was Akiva's rewrite, where he reconceived the whole thing. And I go, I'm not going to have any credit on this movie at all. And it wasn't until the movie was well into production that I get the shooting draft, and it's essentially the draft that I worked on with Will in 2003. They went back to that. They realized at some point that script wasn't working. And so they went back and then Akiva essentially rewrote chunks of my script from the 2003 draft, where maintained the same basic formula. When I look at the movie now, I would say that I feel like the first 2/3 are very much my movie. That's, his relationship with the dog, everything, the way the creatures are, all that. But the final third of the movie, when the boy and the woman show up, is very different. That's where it becomes much more Akiva's movie or that script. Some of the dynamics are the same, especially the final attack by the creatures on his house. But that's where it sort of became markedly different. It was a very different, like the girl was a much darker character, and the boy was very damaged, and it was a darker, more complex story, and there were revelations about the creatures, and so anyhow, I'm very happy. I'm proud of the movie. I'm happy with the movie's success. I've met so many people who love it, but it's not entirely the movie that I envisioned. But it's very rare for a screenwriter to be able to say that, because it's in the process, especially when you're dealing with these huge sums of money and lots of personalities involved, that changes are going to be made.
Where does John Logan fit into this story?
When Ridley came on board, he brought on John Logan because they had just worked on a project together. and John Logan wrote a draft. I was off. I had worked on, I'd been with the project for a long time. Everybody signs on to my script. And then I'm essentially told, so long. And Ridley brought on John Logan. And I've read the John Logan draft. It's very interesting, and it's an interest, but it was very different than what I had done or proposed. And Warner Brothers did not approve the John Logan draft and pretty much insisted that I come back on. And so I worked with Ridley then on the draft that then was going into production with him. I've met Ridley since there was actually one moment where he was thinking of coming back on years later. We met and had a wonderful kind of re-meeting, but it wasn't the, I think, the studio was saying, we want you to work with Mark, and he, I don't know, we got along fine. I worked really hard with him. I was in his offices all the time, and we were hammering out the script, but it was sort of like an arranged marriage.
I've read your 96 and then in March of 97 draft and then the Logan draft. I haven't ever seen the 2003, so I'm curious, what was that like working with Will Smith in 2003 trying to get this going?
Even though I'm really fond of that original draft, I actually think the 2003 Will Smith draft was maybe the best draft of the script. So there were some really interesting ideas in that one. In that 2003 draft, when the girl and the boy show up, when Neville meets them, he rescues them, or they meet, and he takes the girl, he gets the girl to safety, but the little boy is taken by the creatures. And so he then takes the woman back to his home, his, fortress home, and tends to her. She's addicted to drugs. She's got a lot of problems psychologically. And so they're kind of developing a relationship, but both are under the assumption that the boy has been killed because he was taken by the creatures. Neville is very much about staying safe. He's all about staying in his house, being protected, not taking any risks, choosing the safe path. And she starts to challenge him on that, bringing up the idea, these stories that she's heard about there being other survivors somewhere. We need to go out and maybe try to find them. And he's like, no. I'm safe here. We're safe here. We should stay here. Oh, this was another thing actually that was in the book and in the Omega Man, is that the creatures would torment Neville. They knew he was in there. They knew, there was a lot of, they were trying to mess with his head or lure him out, that type of thing. So that was going on. But what they see at a certain point is that the leader of the creatures holds up the boy. It was her brother. It was her little brother in that script. And showing them that they have him and he's alive. The girl she goes, we've got to go find him. We've got to go rescue him. We've got to find their hive, their central, where do they sleep? Where do they gather? They must have a central place somewhere. So she's determined to go rescue her brother. And Neville's like, no, it's a suicide mission. That's what they want us to do. We're dead. You've got to just realize that, the boy is doomed, and if we go after him, we're going to die. And he won't let her leave. It becomes a bit of a control thing. And she drugs him, knocks him out, leaving him, and opens up his facility and escape and leaves, and leaving him vulnerable so that the creatures attack. He manages to escape. Neville manages to escape, but his house is destroyed. And he doesn't know where the girl and the boy are, or where the creatures are. Or I think he has figured out where their headquarters is, their lair, which was very creepy because it was in an abandoned hospital. And I always find abandoned hospitals very creepy. So he's at this point then in the story where, what does he do? Does he go off and try to find a new home and secure himself somewhere else? Or does he go try to find the girl and the boy? And the human thing to do to regain his humanity, he goes and he goes to rescue them. So he goes to the hospital where he knows the creatures are, and he goes in there, and what he discovers in the basement of that hospital is that the creatures are breeding, that they have offspring, that there are children, there are babies. It was a nod to the Matheson book that they're the next generation, that they're the next evolutionary form, that things are going to move differently, proceed differently. And him seeing their children and mothers caring for their children totally messes with Neville's head. Like, I've been killing these things and looking at them as monsters when they're just trying to survive and protect their offspring. And so he has a final confrontation with the main antagonist, the main creature. He ends up killing him, and he manages to escape with the girl, but the suggestion he's not going to keep hunting and killing the creatures. They're going to get away and try to see if there are other people out there. And then that was how it ended.
That sounds remarkably different than what we ended up seeing on screen.
One of the things I was told was that the main man at Warner Brothers at the time, Alan Horn, who's a very nice man, very decent guy, but he felt it was just too dark. I was told that he wasn't, he had pretty much said that he would not make that version of the movie. And so I think that's what led Akiva to rethink the girl and the boy and the very ending and all of that. So
it's weird going through these different drafts. It feels like there's a couple different configurations that you can do. There's Cortman as the antagonist, or there's the more mindless antagonist, or there's no antagonist, or there's the wife and daughter characters, or there's no wife and daughter characters, or there's the girl that comes in at the end. Maybe she's got a son, maybe she's got a little brother, and it feels like you just are kind of moving these same pieces around on a chessboard.
Like with any story, there are numerous variations. In the first draft, which was similar to in the book and in Omega Man, they could talk. They weren't mindless zombies. They weren't animals. They had sort of a complex philosophy, and then that worried the studio about whether that could be pulled off, and should they be more of like I never wanted to call them zombies. I never called them zombies, and there were drafts where there was much more about blood. That the vampiric element of the Matheson book was that blood did play a role. I did a number of drafts where that was part of it.
Right, you refer to them as hemocytes.
Hemocytes, I know, which is a blood term, and my thinking is that there was probably some type of report done, but somewhere along the line that got misinterpreted as that was what they were, or somehow that's what they became called, which I always thought was a pretty cool term. But I ended up really coming around to the idea that they should be voiceless and that they should be much more primitive and kind of savage. A lot of my notes, I remember watching documentaries about hyenas and about hyena behavior, kind of modeled a lot of their action in the script around how hyenas behave. So that there was something kind of savage yet intelligent and clever about them. They weren't dumb. That in none of my drafts were they dim-witted. They always had a certain cleverness to them, like smart animals. So that was always kind of interesting to me.
So from what I understand, this relationship that you had with Will Smith in 2003 is also going to be leading you into working on Old Boy.
That's a whole other story. I was sitting in my office one day when I got a call, and it was from Will Smith's assistant saying, "Will wants to talk to you. Will you be available in 15 minutes?" And I'm like, "Sure." And so Will calls in about 15 minutes, and he says to me, "Mark, I really loved working with you on I Am Legend. I want you to write my next project." And I go, "Of course. What is it?" And he goes, "It's a remake of Old Boy. Do you know Old Boy?" And boy, did I know Old Boy. I loved Old Boy. I was obsessed with Old Boy. And Will says, I want you to write we're going to do a remake. I want you to write it. And I've advocated you to the director, and you have to come out to LA in a couple of days for all this to proceed, and you need to meet the director. And I go, okay, who? And he goes, Steven Spielberg. And I pretty much was speechless at that point. And Will said, Steven really wants to do it. He's really interested. He's watched the movie. We've talked about it. We've got lots of ideas, and he wants to meet you. And so just a few days later, I was getting on a plane from Boston to LA and meeting Steven Spielberg and talking about Old Boy. The first thing I did actually was bring him a set of the original graphic novels. I thought that he might not be aware of them, and so I wanted to share those with him. And I don't know how many people are familiar with the graphic novels of Old Boy, but it's a very different story, and the revelations in it are very different from the film. So I just thought it was an interesting adaptation. And if we wanted to talk about maybe going in different directions, maybe there might be something in the original source material. So I brought that, and he was very intrigued by that, and we had a great conversation, and I was hired. You know, it was an incredible opportunity. You know, and when I talked to Steve, I met with Steven, 3 or 4 times, I think, probably on that project. And we got along great. He loved all my ideas. And he had told me that whether Will might be a little hesitant or whatever, Steven he was determined not to do a light version of the story, to stick with the incest, to have it be intense and violent. And he was, like, if we do a watered down version of this, we're going to get raked over the coals. So ours has to be as dark and twisted as the original, or if not more. And I'm like, sounds great. And he's like, I want to do this. My son loves the original movie, and we've got to do this with some integrity, and we've got to do it with the same kind of intensity and same kind of style and all this. So he was, Steven was on board to do probably the kind of movie that he very rarely does. And I was really excited about that. And so I then spent about probably a month writing a very detailed, very specific treatment. It was probably a 30-page treatment that was similar to my experience with I Am Legend, where I really saw the movie, where I really knew what I wanted to do, and it all just became very clear to me, and that I was really proud of that treatment. And I became very connected with the material. I was like, I really want to do this. This is going to be something. The day I turned in the treatment, I found out that there had been a big falling out between Steven Spielberg and the other producers, and the whole thing fell apart. And Steven wasn't going to do the movie. And because Steven wasn't going to do the movie, Will wasn't going to do the movie. As great a day as it was getting the call from Will Smith, that was one of my worst days. One of my worst professional days was finding out that was all going to fall apart. But I got a call from the producers saying, look, we love your treatment. We'd love you to stay involved in this, but we're going to do this essentially as an independent movie with a lower budget and do it down and dirty. We'd love for you to stay involved, but, we can't pay you what you normally get paid and blah, blah, all this kind of stuff. But the thing is that I had become so attached to that treatment. I had become so attached to the material. And I said, okay, I'll do that. I'll do it if I can be a co-producer and be involved in the movie. And if you like my first draft of the script, I stay involved and I become a participant in the making of the movie. And that's ultimately what happened. And it was funny because I'm really proud of that script. I really think it's one of the best things I've done, and I've had other people say that to me, the Old Boy script that I did. And we got a lot of there was a lot of interest from people. I heard all sorts of stories about people who were interested, but many of them didn't want to do it because of being compared to the original. And that was a big problem. The one that I know was absolutely concrete was David Fincher wanted to do it. And he didn't have concerns about that. But he wanted to do it, but what he said to the producers was, if I do this movie, I see you now and then I see you at the screening. He wanted complete control. At least that's what I was told. But he did not want any interference from the producers. He wanted to do it, and they wouldn't give him that, so he left. And so then we tried to then we went out to various people, and again, like I said, we got a lot of good feedback about the script, but people were just afraid about the comparisons to the remake until Spike came along, and Spike was at a point in his career he had just signed with a new agency, and he wanted to prove that he could be a director for hire. He wanted to show people that he could do something different, not what was normally expected of him. And that's how that came about. And then Josh Brolin came on, and Josh really wanted to do it, and Josh and Spike and I met, and everything went forward from that. And it's a frustrating movie for me. I actually haven't watched it since it came out because, again, it's one of the frustrations about being a screenwriter is that you have a certain vision of the movie in your head when you write the script, and that vision is always there. And then when the director comes on board, he has his vision, he or she has their vision. And I worked during the production of The Cell. I was on set. I worked with Spike. Spike and I got along fine. Spike and the producers had a contentious relationship, so it wasn't the easiest go of it. There's a lot about the movie I love. Josh is great in it. I think it's one of his best performances. I like so much of what Spike did. There's also other stuff that was frustrating for me because it's not what I envisioned. And ultimately, I don't know if the movie entirely works because I don't know if Spike doing this kind of thing is what he's best at. I think he does thrive in doing things like Black Klansman or Do the Right Thing, and that's where he's really committed and passionate, and he's a very skilled filmmaker, but I don't know if he was the right director for the movie. I don't know who that right director was. Part of the problem is that people were just, a lot of fans of the original film were just opposed to the idea of a remake, period. There was just such a negative perspective. Like when we were doing press for the movie, so many people that I talked to were just like, convince me that this is a good idea. And that's a bad place to come from. What I've come to believe about myself and about that project is if I had gotten a call and someone asked me, a producer asked me, are you interested in writing the remake of Old Boy? I would have said no. But that's not the call I got. The call I got was, how about writing a remake of Old Boy starring Will Smith, directed by Steven Spielberg? I'm not going to turn that down. But when they left, the headspace I was in was I was so attached to the project. I was just so attached to what I had done creatively with it so far that I wanted to see it through.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this.
Have a good night. Okay, bye.
we are back and we were talking about The Omega Man and Last Man on Earth and I Am Legend. And I have to say, guys, I was over here laughing quite a bit when you were bringing up the idea of a Netflix series, because sneak peek into next week when we talk about Annihilation, my co-hosts on that were saying, oh, this would work really well if we did the whole Southern Reach trilogy as a Netflix series. So there's something in the air right now. It's like, you got a failing movie, turn it into a Netflix project.
How long can this bubble last? And who even has the time to watch all of this stuff?
Yeah, I know I don't. I keep hearing about great TV shows that I just have no time to watch.
I confess it's been a long time since I've watched any sort of multi-part TV show. My wife is always saying, hey, try watching this, try watching that. And no, my head's still in the old days of episodic TV. Yep, let's have a half-hour episode when I feel like it, when I've got the time. Otherwise, no, it's movies all the way, baby.
Yeah, it was kind of weird with this CBS All Access thing, how they're just releasing one episode a week of stuff. Even stuff that's canceled, like Swamp Thing. It's like, why not just dump it all right now, guys? Come on. But no, it's every week. So I kind of like that, and I kind of like this whole idea, like watching Star Trek Discovery and having one episode each week. I was just like, okay, yeah, you're keeping me in suspense. I am very curious what's going to happen next. So it can still happen, guys. You can still do a week-to-week TV series. It's okay.
Deferred gratification is now retro.
That's so early 21st century.
So I want to thank you guys for coming on the show, and I'm very curious, Maurice, what's the latest with you, sir?
Well, by the time this episode drops, we should have a couple of new episodes, well, one new episode of Love That Album. I'll be talking with a wonderful film blogger, Kerry Gately-Fristow, about the 1971 album from Todd Rundgren's Something Anything. So a lot of wonderful power pop talk there, I'm hoping. And I've just finished editing, but we'll release later on in the month an interview that I did with director Gillian Armstrong about her 1982 film Starstruck, and I also had a discussion with local film scriptwriter or TV show scriptwriter Mr. Paul Ryan. No, not that Paul Ryan. Yeah, but we had a lot of interesting things I hope to say about Starstruck, and certainly it was absolutely marvelous having Gillian on the show, and she's very, very affectionate and very fond of that film. I think she still calls it her baby, and she's done a ton of stuff, and everyone seems to remember her mostly for My Brilliant Career. But I think that Starstruck really did sort of start a lot of things in terms of visual aspects of Australian cinema over the next 10, 15 years or so.
So, Andrew, what's keeping you busy these days?
My own private dystopian hell is my PhD, actually, which is almost finished. But I've also been working on, I've got a new sort of pulp history book that I've co-edited. It's called Sticking It to the Man, Revolution and Counterculture in Pulp and Popular Fiction 1950 to 1980, which I've co-edited with my friend Ian McIntyre, and which is out via Oakland-based PM Press probably in October, and in which we talk about the fiction of the 50s, 60s and 70s related to revolution, Black Power, Vietnam, the Weathermen, all kinds of wonderful oddities. You can read all kinds of things about that related to what we've been talking about in in the Omega Man.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. Please head on over to the website, projectionboothpodcast.com, where you can find out more about today's episode. You'll also find links over to iTunes, or I suppose maybe by the time this episode gets out, it'll be called Apple Podcast. That really rolls off the tongue, where you can rate and review the show, and to Patreon, where you can make a donation to the show. Donors get early access to every episode as long as I'm not running late. Every donation and every rating we get helps the Projection Booth take over the world.
suicide flicks hit the running high. Tell me who shit could shine the body. For the damn, I got a hold a gun and come loaded to kill everything that I am. Well, I am the owl and nitty gritty right. I really look at the crime. Yeah, well, I am the owl. Yeah, one of the camp. Ow, pour the gasoline and burn the fucker clean. Tell me who shit who I want her. Suicide flicks hit the running high. Tell me who shit could shine the body.
If you enjoy this show and want more people to know about it, head on over to iTunes, leave a comment, and rate it 5 stars. Make sure you like and share us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Just search for Christopher Media. Thank you in advance for supporting Christopher Media by clicking on the PayPal button and by clicking through to all the sponsors who support ChristopherMedia.net. Most importantly, we would like to take the time to extend an extra special thanks to you. Christopher Media could not exist without your support. Thank you for visiting ChristopherMedia.net, and thank you for listening. Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.